Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Received a Bouquet of Roses from Someone? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Katsuki grew up in a household where his parents never gifted each other well. His Christmas or birthdays were frequently celebrated alone. And not that he despises it, he actually adored the peace and quiet, especially in a household where screaming and fighting are basically a normal thing. He didn't really mind it anyway. Gifts were only materials given to someone on special occasions. He had always thought that actions were greater than gifts. Thus, why just love your partners every day of your lives? Now at 23, Katsuki was already living the life he so dreamed of ever since he was young, though he never imagined he would end up with Izuku after years of rivalry and competition. Everything was faring with both of them pretty well. His daily life is filled with hero duties and protecting his city, happily staying in an apartment he and Izuku had bought after saving up enough money for almost 2 years, and just loving everything about his boyfriend and everything in his life. They were both financially capable and life was going too smoothly, though the thought of having children came to mind every now and then. They never communicated about it properly enough that Katsuki just shrugged off and understood that Izuku may not want to have children at all. What can go wrong? Do you have anything to give Midoriya, Bakugo? Kirishima asks beside him, chugging off the glass of beer in one go. Katsuki shrugs, hating the smell of the alcohol. For what? It's Valentine's Day tomorrow, dude. Kirishima exclaims in disbelief. The redhead giggles right after. I took a day off tomorrow so Mina and I could go to Maldives. We haven't had a proper vacation ever since the start of the year, honestly. Katsuki gave him a mirthless laugh. I'm on duty for tomorrow as usual, and for FS sake, I don't really celebrate those things. The redhead furrows his brows, not really stunned by how Katsuki had mouthed his reply. You two aren't going to celebrate? Katsuki nods dismissively. Come on, man. I think it's the best time for both of you to catch up again. We've been hella busy with work after all. The blonde groans as he rolls his eyes. Can you shut it about lovey-dovey shit already? I don't celebrate silly occasions, okay? I ain't no teenager. Kirishima lets out a long-suffering sigh. It's not childish, man. It's just a special day to pamper your lover. I do that every day. Katsuki declares. So what's the point of celebrating a shitty celebration for just a day? Kirishima shrugs beside him. It's more of an ending act, I guess. Like with adult couples, for example, with work and a shit ton of responsibilities, we don't get to pamper our loved ones as much as we want to, so holidays like this are meant to be celebrated. But anyway, I'm not forcing you, don't worry. I guess not all couples like it. He softly whispers after. His parents never really celebrated anything together. They don't even notice their anniversaries passing by. Thus, as Katsuki grew up, he never really gave much importance to those kinds of events. He just loved Izuku. That's what being in a relationship was all about, right? He went home late that night and found a heavily sleeping Izuku on their king-sized bed, tucked in their heavy comforter and the dozens of pillows he begged Katsuki to buy. Katsuki smiles though, adoring the cute sleeping expression his boyfriend held as he slept. He slipped under the comforters and embraced the slightly smaller man in his arms. He has nothing to worry about, right? Their relationship was steady. Izuku seemed happy. Everything was perfect already. What more could they ask for? When morning came, the two ate breakfast together as usual, courtesy of Katsuki cooking and plating everything since Izuku was a disaster in the kitchen. They ate side by side peacefully, enjoying each other's warmth, like how they usually do every morning. Ida-kun gave Ochako-chan large flower bouquets last night. Izuku blurted, stuffing his mouth with pancakes right after. Katsuki just hums dismissively. I helped him prepare the surprise actually, it was so romantic. He adds. Katsuki couldn't see how Izuku had gazed at him. It was as if he had wanted Katsuki to at least react, not just agree as he told the story. Katsuki couldn't decipher it well though. It was not the first time Izuku had held that kind of expression, like a side of Izuku he never knew. The greenette gulps slowly. Oh, Ochako-chan looked so happy too. Katsuki snickers. I bet round face's cheeks were too red. They were. She was so red, I thought she was going to explode. Izuku borderline yells out, his mood finally lifting. Katsuki smiled. Goodness, he loved how adorable Izuku truly was. When he was young, he never really cared about that at all. He just wanted to keep Izuku at arm's length for some reason. But as he slowly fell in love with Izuku as time passed by, he slowly saw the little things his partner had, either be it about his mannerisms, the things he liked, the things he hated, his acts, how he does things, etc. And yes, one by one he loved them all. What else? Izuku pouts, I only got a few chocolates this year. Then scratches the back of his head, also, Ida-kun bought Ochako-chan a box full of chocolates. It was massive. He threw his hands in the air exaggeratedly. She seemed really happy. He whispers after. Katsuki rose from his seat, taking his plate. Good for them, he curtly replied. Give me your plate, I'll wash it too. You should get ready for work, nerd. He adds, not even taking a glance at the teary-eyed man behind him. Izuku's hopeful expression instantly drops before Katsuki could notice it, but the greenette shakes his head softly before sighing, as if he's understanding or rather, giving up on something. Okay, got it. The two spent the entire day away from each other. They had different agencies after all. Katsuki had dreaded seeing romantic sheets on billboards that made his eyes squint. Those red hearts were annoying him so much. Couples were all around Mizudafu, enjoying their dates and acting lovey-dovey. Katsuki hates PDA. Most of the time when he and Izuku are out he makes sure that they stay professional. He scolds the greenette sometimes when he gets too clingy or too close. He was a strict man outside, yes, but he was sure that the amount of love he gave Izuku in private was doubled. Katsuki knew Izuku deserved everything, every amount of love he could give. The greenette stayed faithful in the 5 years they were together. He remained the same and never acted differently. He was playful and exciting and loving and kind and everything Katsuki wishes for a partner. Truth be told, Katsuki never even wanted a lover in the first place. No one suited his eye well enough. Those gems others loved to call were just a bunch of extras wanting nothing but to F him and have his goddamn babies. But his Izuku? His Izuku is 1,000 times different. He stood his ground and held his head high, yet he was still humble and down to earth, loved helping others and had this smart butt brain that makes Katsuki fumble and act out of character. He was someone who, though Katsuki doesn't want to admit, someone who's really much out of his league. He loves Izuku so much he can't even comprehend nor say how big his love is for him. Well, Katsuki does SCK at communication, that's why. No gift could ever be greater than his unconditional love for the man. He was going to marry Izuku, that was for sure. He could see it so clearly. In a lovely garden. With red flowers all around, their closest friends being their only guests, Katsuki would be wearing a black tuxedo and he would tease Izuku about wearing a dress, but he would let Izuku wear whatever he wants, of course. Either a black tuxedo as well, a white one, his hero suit, even let him wear his ridiculous red sneakers. They'd live in a simple penthouse and protect Mizudafu as always. Kids would look up to them and Katsuki would ravish in that kind of life. There was no need for silly gifts or bouquets of flowers and little vacations. Anniversaries or Valentines or even birthdays weren't relevant. What's important was that they were together side by side for the rest of their lives. However, at the sight of Izuku being handed a bouquet of flowers by some extra, Katsuki couldn't even figure out who just in front of Endeavor's agency ignites something inside of him. What the F dash? He says under his breath. The blonde was just in his usual patrol rounds when he had spotted two individuals on the sidewalk ahead of him, in front of that large agency in the city, an agency mainly controlled by the younger Todoroki BSRD as his father manages the main branch. Katsuki instantly rushes towards an alleyway right beside the building and slammed his back against the brick wall, making sure that he wasn't spotted by neither of the two. He peeks through the small crevice in lightning speed and questions himself about why he was acting this way. He had seen many individuals hand Izuku gifts and presents on several occasions and he had acted passive about it. But this, Katsuki feels threatened about this. Izuku wears his yellow scarf around his neck like how he wore it as he left their home, for the purpose of protecting his neck from the cold, but right now Katsuki guesses it served a different purpose as Izuku lifted up the hem of the yellow cloth to hide away his reddening cheeks. Katsuki trembles as the freckled man freely took the large bouquet, almost too surprised, with emerald eyes blown wide and shining like gems in the moonlight, and a vibrant smile reaching his ears. Izuku sheepishly twirls a strand of his hair and puts it behind his ear. The other man, who Katsuki perceived as that foreign hero diplomat newly stationed in Endeavor's, now Shudo's agency for some partnership abroad that Katsuki wasn't that aware of, beams back with the same grace before pulling another box, specifically a chocolate-filled box based on its label, from his side bag. Katsuki was so close but yet so far to reach for his love, but he could clearly see how Izuku's lips had moved as he said, "That's so sweet of you, these flowers are lovely." The white man chuckles, scratching the back of his head, "I suspect that you find it to your liking?" Izuku chuckles too before nodding, "I do. No one has actually ever given me flowers before." The other man gasped at that, "Really? That's absurd. I don't believe it, Izuku." Katsuki tries to breathe, he gulps, his fists clenched. So the fucker calls his lover by his first name? The next words they said were already inaudible for Katsuki as they headed their way inside of the building. He couldn't understand it clearly since his head was already too clogged. He was sure that Izuku wasn't cheating on him or whatsoever, but the fact that he seemed too fing happy just by receiving some silly flowers that came from another man had broke down every bit of confidence and self-control Katsuki had in himself. Was that why Izuku looked at flower shops on their anniversaries before? Or how he longed to go to a beach somewhere with Katsuki? Was that why he boasts out how lucky his friends were with their lovers? His longing gaze and his half-butted expressions, was it because Katsuki had never ever let him feel special for the 5 years they were together? But he made sure to love Izuku truthfully, wasn't that all there is to loving? To say words of adoration and to always be with them, to keep them safe from danger and to make sure they're well and healthy, to keep promises and to vow more. That was loving, right? Or was that just a part of loving? Thus, on instinct, Katsuki pulled out his phone and dialed his lover's number, almost smashing the keyboard. He gulps before breathing harshly, trying to calm himself down. "Hey, Kaken," he greets, his voice still soft and loving. Katsuki breathes again, "Hey, what time are you coming home?" He doesn't even know why he was being frantic. The greenette seemed to be wary of the situation. "6 as usual, is there something wrong, Kaken?" Katsuki sighs unknowingly. Izuku was still the same, he wouldn't change just because someone had given him something he had always wanted. Had Izuku really desired for those kind of gifts? Katsuki wasn't even sure anymore. "Nothing, no need to worry." Izuku hums. "Just call me if you need anything, alright?" Silence takes over them. Katsuki tries to recollect himself. Everything was fine. Everything was okay, their relationship is stable, there was nothing wrong, he was doing nothing wrong. Don't get yourself killed, nerd. "I love you," was what he meant to say. Izuku snickers. "Of course, you too, Kaken. I love you so much." He pauses, not yet ending the call before hesitantly saying, "Happy Valentine's Day, Kaken." Katsuki didn't reply back. That night, Katsuki and Izuku slept together as usual. The greenette was snuggled closely to his chest, now with a smile on his lips. His arms were wrapped around Katsuki's, tightly and clasped. The room was so cold for Katsuki though, the large heavy blankets didn't help either. He gazes at the white flowers that were sitting on the far side of the room, prettily hanging out there as if they were decorations. Izuku brought them home earlier, and made sure to put them in a vase to keep them alive. Katsuki grimaced though. A note was placed on the side of the vase, clipped on one of the stems of the flower. "You've mentioned you have taken a liking on white roses, I hope you like this. Pro Hero Thorns." It said. What hurts most was that Katsuki wasn't aware of that information. Katsuki couldn't deny that he began to be less affectionate to his boyfriend as the days passed by, but he couldn't blame himself anyway as he had been very insecure lately. His emotions were starting to get all over the place. He was letting out his frustration to the villains on the streets, or to other citizens not abiding by the law, and he noticed that he had been extremely aggressive in his patrols and in his office work. He was frustrated, mainly disappointed in himself that he couldn't properly have self-control and also couldn't stop loathing and being so envious about the flowers or to that foreign hero who had definitely made Izuku happier these days. He didn't really longing to come home as of lately. Izuku started to smell like those crappy flower, the whole house effing smelled like dead white roses, and soil, and fertilizer, and everything he disliked most. The lavender-scented perfume that Katsuki had grown accustomed to was instantly replaced by something that makes him want to puke and stop smelling anything all in all. He hated how he couldn't talk it out to Izuku like he always does. He feared that he might be called as someone who's overly sensitive, though he knew Izuku would never say that nor even think of him as that. Getting jealous over little presents still sounded so ridiculous. He didn't understand his own feelings. One time he knew he was jealous of the man who was giving his boyfriend flowers and overly disgusting affection. He knew very well that Izuku wouldn't ever cheat on him. His lover was extremely faithful and Katsuki trusts him so. Then the next he starts glaring at the flowers at home. Maybe it's because for so long he thought that not giving one another those kinds of NTMT materials was okay, but now that he has seen firsthand how happy Izuku was after being given those, Katsuki felt ashamed, envious, and mad. He didn't want to overthink much, but he kept questioning himself. Has he ever been a really loving lover to Izuku? He tried his very best, yes, but was his best really enough? Were kisses at night or little talks really count? Did the hugs or the little kisses or the simple phrases of adoration even mattered? Were the soft caresses as Katsuki held Izuku's hips at NTMT nights? Or how he places long wet kisses on his belly, or how he slows down his moves whenever Izuku's body would tremble from pleasure or overstimulation still not enough? Were Katsuki's protective acts or his little mannerisms of love or everything he effing did for the last 5 years even considered a bare minimum when it came to loving? He wanted to know what Izuku felt, how Izuku handled not being handed anything for the past 5 years. Katsuki wanted to know if he ever cried in a corner at nights of their anniversaries because Katsuki gave him nothing but a simple greeting. Katsuki desired to know if Izuku ever felt so little, or if he ever gazed at his friends who surprised their lovers on NTMT occasions. Did he ever wish to have Katsuki do that to him too? Did he ever bite his lip when he wanted to bring that topic up? Did he ever, even in one moment, look at Katsuki's face and wonder if the blonde really loved him? Katsuki didn't know how to give someone. He didn't know what Izuku would have liked to receive. He wasn't raised in a family who wrapped presents under Christmas trees. He never got to open up ribbons and cut out cardboards and acted surprised at childish presents. There was no act of giving in the household that he grew up with. So how could he understand how to give someone a goddarn gift? He says he isn't sure if he's really jealous of Izuku's admirer, but deep down he really was. He was jealous of how he knew the act of gifting someone, that he knew how to make someone happy, that he knew the purpose of gifting. While Katsuki himself still can't grasp the idea of presents. He didn't find sense to the idea of flowers, or the large bouquets men were giving to their women. If flowers wilted fast, why keep and give it? What was so special about being gifted? And what was so special about gifting? Boxes after boxes of different kinds of flowers were sent in their apartment, all being from that FNG foreign man. Katsuki wanted to burn all of it down until they were nothing but ashes, but he stopped himself as he saw Izuku's lovely smile and how his eyes brightened up as he inhaled their scent as if his life depended on it. "Look, Kaken, Mr. Clark gave me flowers again," he exclaims with a large smile, showing all of the petals before giggling prettily in front of Katsuki's face. Did Izuku have any idea how that set off Katsuki? And how ashamed he felt. Someone else was making his man happy. Someone else was making him laugh and giggle, and everything he wishes he could also do. The greenette praised the beauty of the flowers and held them in his fingertips one by one, appreciating its scent and its petals and every FNG single thing. "Good mornin', Kaken." Izuku greets the next morning, wearing nothing but Katsuki's raven shirt that was extremely loose on him and a pair of black boxers. That shirt was already fairly large on Katsuki, and it was noticeable how massive it was on Izuku's body. The shirt reached his thighs but didn't cover his collar well. He digs a knuckle in his inner eyes, trying to wake himself. He yawns before smiling at the smell of pancakes in the early morning, his eyes glinting with love at the sight of Katsuki in his pajamas and apron. If Katsuki was in his right mind, he would be ravishing the greenette any minute now. Taste him until he sputters out nothing but high-pitched m's, yet instead of doing things he usually do like being happy seeing his lover's presence, he scowls. The scent of those white flowers had been so intense lately it was starting to drive him mad. He felt a pair of arms wrap around him from behind, which did not surprise him since Izuku wasn't that sleek enough. The greenette tapped his fingers on his abdomen slowly, as if he was signaling something, a signal Katsuki was well aware about. It's not every time Izuku would take charge. Usually it's Katsuki who initiates intimacy, but Izuku's signing that he wants to take the lead was something Katsuki enjoys deeply. If only he hadn't been stressed out these days, he could have let Izuku's hands wander on him, around him, but instead he clicks his tongue and untangles the greenette's arms off of him. Go set up the table, he orders. He didn't see the look of defeat in Izuku's emerald eyes, but the sigh and small whine he made was already enough for Katsuki to know that he was disappointed. Okay, he whispers before withdrawing himself. Katsuki felt the tense air, the silence suffocating enough that he could feel himself being out of breath. He sees the greenette from the corner of his eyes, quickly fixes their table before heading towards their open balcony where the pots of flowers were located. He gives heavy attention to the chrysanthemums placed at the center of every pot and plucks a bloomed orange one with extra careness. He then trekked towards his lover. The tension on his face was visible, but he still gave Katsuki a soft smile as he presented the little bud. It had small orange petals, they were long and vertical, creating a lovely effect on the structure. Katsuki raised a brow at the act. They remind me of you, Izuku solemnly says. Katsuki only blinked. Chrysanthemums represent happiness, love, longevity, and joy. He starts softly, just like how you make me feel. Katsuki was sure he felt his heart ache. He gazed upon the flower. It didn't make sense to him. Yes, it was pretty, it was adorable and appealing and vibrant in many ways. But what made it so special? Was it the messages embedded in it? How? Was the next word he had uttered. Izuku reached for his hand that was placed by his hip, caressing it so gently before opening his fingers voluntarily. Izuku placed the bud onto his palm softly, and his radiating heat seemed to have melted the flower as it plopped down. The greenette just giggled once more before suggesting, "Let's eat, we're gonna be late for work." Was a flower meant to make someone feel at ease? Was it meant to give meaning to words that were left unsaid? The night after, Katsuki finds himself with Kirishima in a nightclub. He wasn't drinking nor doing anything, it was pathetic really, but all he did was stare at a void as the redhead chugs down glass after glass of liquor. It was rather a routine for the both of them to drink when someone feels off. Luckily, Kirishima had been feeling stressed lately and so was Katsuki. I've wanted to tell Mina that I really want to settle down now, but seriously I don't know how. The redhead rants out, brows furrowed and lips forming a small pout. Katsuki only hums, face looking so dead as he fiddles with his fingers. It doesn't take time before Kirishima notices his lack of enthusiasm. He furrows his brows and blinks. By the way, you wouldn't just invite me to some drinks. Something's surely off with you. Katsuki shook off his head before sighing, tiredly rolling his eyes before taking Kirishima's cup and sipping the strong liquid. He travels his fingers through his hair harshly before groaning loud and hoarse. I think, goodness. He couldn't finish. The redhead seemed worried enough, moving closer before pinging his head to the side. He didn't say anything yet, thus, Katsuki took it as a signal to go on. Deku and I are falling out of place. He breathes out. Kirishima raised a brow. Huh? What do you mean? Katsuki massaged his forehead. Everything's going so wrong, we haven't talked in so long. He snickers bitterly. We live in the effing same house, Kirishima. The blonde buried his hands in his hair, trying his hardest not to cry. Kirishima still looked confused. Care to elaborate through? The blonde rolls his eyes again. I know it's starting from me. I'm so effing confused. I don't know what to effing you do. He borderline yells. He continues. I feel like what I do would never be effing enough cuz. How? He rasps. How can I do something I've never done before? How can I make him feel special? How can I cross my boundaries? Katsuki groans after, looking at his reflection on the marbled table. The redhead looked apologetic as he rubbed Katsuki's shoulder, trying to calm him down. The blonde hero instantly calms himself. He didn't want to create havoc inside a public space as it would be unhero-like. As much as he loves boasting around and being as showy as possible, he didn't want everyone to see his weaker side. Kirishima seemed to still be letting everything sink down with his thin lips closed and his eyes casted down. Katsuki knew that the redhead wouldn't understand the dilemma he was holding inside since Kirishima had a wonderful relationship. He had enough experience before dating Mina. He knew how to love someone properly, unlike someone, specifically Katsuki, who was raised in a dysfunctional family and is still learning about everything involving how loving really works. How do you do it? Katsuki suddenly blurts out. Kirishima raises a brow once more. Do what? Katsuki sighs. Love raccoon eyes? How do you do love? It was a silly question, but Katsuki was already desperate. Kirishima pursed his lips, deep in thought. A silence enveloped them for a while. But Katsuki stayed silent as he waited. Everybody has different love languages, Bokugu. He starts. For me, I love giving Mina things and expensive stuff since it shows that what I give her is something I work hard for. He looks at Katsuki now, giving him a soft smile before patting his shoulders. I don't want to dig deeper into both yours and Midoriya's problems, but if it's about crossing your own boundaries and sacrificing, he shrugs. That's what loving is. Love is about crossing boundaries and doing different things, even if you have no clue what they are. Kirishima twisted the ring fitted perfectly on his ring finger, because if you don't step out of your comfort zone, how can you two grow together as a couple? Something awakened inside Katsuki. He was no coward to give up and get confused. He was a man who faced challenges after challenges. He could face this one. After their talk, Kirishima lets him off, laughing as he sends him good luck. Thus, Katsuki runs fast to the nearest flower shop he saw downtown. The shop was deserted, but thankfully, a little sunflower was left alone. Katsuki took it and paid the vendor quickly. He'll show Izuku he would show that he could step out of his own boundaries. That he can be a man who's worth it. He runs to their apartment, excited, too excited to give his very first gift to Izuku. In his 23 years of existence, 10 years of being in love, and 5 years of being with the love of his life, this was the first time he'll be gifting Izuku. The light of the living room was open, and he instantly hears Izuku talking to someone over the phone, probably Ochako. Katsuki fixes his collar, readying himself for the most special moment of his life. Clark gave me a bouquet again, Ochako-chan. It's bigger than before too. Katsuki's heart sinks. Katsuki peeks through the crevice of the slightly open door, and his heart was instantly squeezed alive at the sight of Izuku holding a large bouquet of violet and white roses, all brought together in a pink floral Japanese paper with a gold linen binding them together. The kid's a really good hero, I tell you, Ochako-chan. Katsuki looks at the fallen yellow flower he held so dearly. It was pretty, but it wasn't as pretty as the one Izuku was currently holding. It looked so dead, so out of color, so undeserving. Katsuki throws the sunflower in the trash bin near him. The world was cruel, some people would say. It was cruel in a way that people are taught to hide away their feelings and shut their burdened inquiries in fear of getting rejected. Katsuki proved that theory so right. The world was indeed cruel. He was made to be a coward, he was made to never be enough, he was made to always back down in defeat. That was what he was, wasn't he? He hides his feelings in the deepest trenches of his soul and keeps them away until they burst in flames at how big they have grown. He cries himself away from all of the judgmental eyes looking at his every move so they wouldn't see his weak side. They saw him as one of the pillars of hope, deemed him as great as all might, declared him to be their symbol of victory, and claimed that he was a man of strength and confidence. Where was the confidence they screamed he had now? The wilted yellow flower he had thrown away so quickly just after seeing something more precious than it was clear evidence of the fact that he lacked confidence, that he lacked in everything. He just desired to be a worthy lover, someone who can make his Izuku smile, someone who can at least give Izuku the rest he needed for shouldering the weight of being All Might's successor. Katsuki sighs deeply, stretching his limbs up high as he leans his back on the headboard of the bed. The joints in his arms had already formed knots due to the intense hero activities he had to do for the past few weeks, and so he had to roll his shoulders more vigorously to tend to the numbness. To say that he was exhausted was an understatement. He was physically and emotionally exhausted and tired and incapable of anything and just void. It was late at night, specifically 11:34, most of the time he sleeps as early as 9, but it has already become a routine for him to sleep so close to midnight and just wake up so early in the morning. It made him cranky most of the time, but he had no choice anyway. Insomnia had always been one of his greatest foes. He already wore his sleeping wear, a simple loose black cotton long-sleeve shirt and a pair of gray pajamas. Yet still he keeps his eyes open, waiting for a certain greenette to come out of the showers just near the entrance of the bedroom. The television placed on the wall in front of their bed was playing some random but movie Katsuki didn't even put on, not like he cares anyway. His mind has been floating in euphoria for a while now as he listens to Izuku's hums echoing throughout the room. The greenette bathing at night was already a routine of his. Most of the time Katsuki joins him too, but tonight Katsuki stayed firm on the bed. His mind was too clouded. The sounds of Izuku's hums felt so good in his ears, as if it was a siren's voice erasing his bad thoughts away. It made Katsuki smile at least. Through the hardships of his own self-discovery and raging jealousy, those humming made him realize that Izuku was still here. His boyfriend would never fall out of love, his lover would never replace nor forsake him. It was normal for couples to face disputes. Katsuki just needed to learn how to voice out his emotions. After a couple more minutes, Izuku returns to their bed in nothing but a robe, his hair glistening with the residue of his shower, his cheeks slightly red making Katsuki know that he had taken a hot bath. But instead feeling the fire of lust in his core, Katsuki felt nothing but love and adoration as he gazed at Izuku's almost naked form. His sweet childhood best friend. His rival and arch-nemesis. His one and only love. Kaken? Izuku suddenly calls out. He must have noticed Katsuki's lingering stare. The blonde hummed before giving him a soft smile. Acting as if the large bouquet of white and purple flowers that was probably on their table in the dining room was already forgotten. "You've been staring at me, is there something wrong?" Izuku asks, walking towards their cabinet and unconsciously removing his robe, revealing nothing but his naked glory to his lover. "You stare at me all the time, can't I do the same?" Katsuki spats back, smirking. The greenette rolls his eyes as a tint of redness forms on his face. But still. Katsuki quirked a brow, a bit confused as to why Izuku was stuttering. As Izuku finally throws on just a pair of All Might-themed boxers that had Katsuki snickering a bit and one of Katsuki's tank tops, he looks back. "I feel weird when you stare at me like that." Katsuki shook his head, stretching out his hand to which Izuku gladly took. "There's no law in the principles of loving which tells me that I can't stare at my lover at night after he took a shower." The greenette rolls his eyes again before scoffing playfully. He laughs sarcastically. "Very funny." Katsuki shrugs. "I'm a good joker." Izuku crawled under the gray duvet and Katsuki quickly took him in his arms, embracing his waist and nuzzling his neck. He smiled in relief at the smell of lavender again. He loathed the smell of those white roses that lingered around their house. To his surprise, Katsuki feels Izuku's warm and scarred hands crawl on his skin, touching his chest in a very NTMT way. The blonde smiles warmly at the gesture, ignoring his trembling heart and setting his mind at ease. "Why the sudden invitation?" he inquires, planting a wet kiss on his lover's cheek. The greenette looks up at him with eyes Katsuki couldn't even resist. His vibrant green orbs shone as the moonlight cascading through the opened window hits his face with such precision which had made Katsuki certain there's a deity masked in a mortal form in front of him. Izuku scoots closer, putting his nose directly on Katsuki's exposed neck. "I haven't touched my kaken in a while now." He murmurs, almost whisper-like. "I missed you so much. Wanna touch you, want you to touch me too." Izuku says softly into the night before opening his mouth and lapping the other Adam's apple, liking it a few times and smiling at the groans Katsuki had given. Katsuki instantly ems at the attention as the sensitive spot on his neck was attacked vigorously by his lover. In all honesty, Izuku was a monster in bed. This silly little broccoli might look like an angel walking down the streets in the city with his goody two-red shoes and smiling upon children after his duties. But Katsuki was well aware of all of his actions and mannerism in bed and how eager he is in their sessions. He milks Katsuki's pee-pee dry until the blonde is nothing but a sobbing mess trying to still F Izuku on the mattress. His stamina is impeccably strong to the point where Katsuki even thought sometimes if he should be the bottom one instead. But nonetheless, Izuku does love being on the receiving side even with his massive stock of KNKS and desires. Katsuki breathes deep before pulling Izuku closer to him, tumbling up so he could be on top, then placing his hands on the side of the greenette's head. Staring at his lover has never felt this good. They haven't done the deed in several weeks now with their work and duties at bay, and in all honesty, Katsuki had grown to be quite frustrated and pent up. He knew Izuku might be suffering with it too. It didn't take long before they were both bare in front of each other, slotting both of their bodies together in a quick harmony as body heat radiates in their cores. It continued until they were kissing each other sloppily with saliva and body liquids dropping on the warm mattress, both their hips moving on each other in rhythm. Katsuki was already hard, so hard it hurt. But he decides to lower himself, lining his face on Izuku's stomach before caressing the greenette's bulge with soft fingers. Izuku was already miming so loud once Katsuki had liked a long stripe across his stomach, smirking at how pretty the expression the greenette had made. Kaken, please. Izuku groans out, his nails scratching the blonde's back harshly. Katsuki smirks, breathing while he lifts his head up. What is it, my darling? He huffs suddenly, proud of the sight before him. I've only just kissed and touched you, but you looked so effed, Izuku. Izuku flinches at the warm hand on his hip, reaching for his bum and giving it a hard squeeze. Izuku gasps, feeling a wet finger coated with the lube from the bedside table cabinet that was probably thrown on the ground breaching inside him. The greenette scratches Katsuki's backside more, earning a loud from the blonde. Make love to me, Kaken. Izuku says like a mantra, mind in a haze and eyes ablaze. The blonde only smirks before finally lining up his hardened pee-pee against his lover's entrance, releasing a searing breath before pushing in with eagerness. Katsuki out a high-pitched at the same time Izuku screams to his heart's content. You feel so good, Izuku. He starts moving slowly, looking directly at Izuku's hazy green eyes and being lost in them. He moves and rolls his hips, the tightness too good to be true. He breathes deeply again, now suddenly feeling his fingers and chest tensing. Not now. His breathing suddenly became panicked, now only hearing Izuku's loud ems underneath him and seeing the way he spread his legs with his hands under his calves apart, the loud slapping of their skins ring in his ears like some kind of a mantra. The air blew cold outside, everything felt so warm and hot like they were scorching his skin alive. Oh, the smell of the white roses burn his nose, the sight of the small chrysanthemums hanging by their window fence. Katsuki remembers the sunflower he threw away. Katsuki remembers his aching thoughts. He remembers his mistakes. He remembers Izuku's face when he received those flowers. He remembers his realizations. He moves frantically, finding a way to eradicate his thoughts. He clenches his fists on Izuku's curly hair, pulling it upwards, which earns another loud He focuses on the high pleasure, on the goodness of the tightness and the heat Izuku was giving. He focuses on what was happening. He was making love with Izuku and his lover looked very pleased. Katsuki was enough, is enough. He's doing well, Izuku's happy right now, Izuku is in bliss, Izuku is in euphoria. Katsuki was doing fine. He was okay. They were okay. No, he wasn't fine. He pistons onto Izuku hard. Moves becoming rough and dominating, pushing Izuku to his limits. He was confused. He was conflicted. He was a mess inside. He didn't know what to do. How can a small problem like this even get the best of him? Before the blonde realizes, the greenette had already reached his climax and had already released. He follows after, filling Izuku's stomach with white warmth. Izuku looked a bliss, enjoying the afterglow of the overstimulation and rough lovemaking they had just done. Before Katsuki could pull out in panic, the greenette had reached for his face to give it a soft caress. They stayed like that for a while, just staring at each other. Katsuki lets go of Izuku's hair, pulls his pee-pee out of Izuku's tight heat before plopping down beside him. They stayed like that until Izuku's eyes tired out, and as he closed his eyes without even thinking of cleaning each other, Katsuki couldn't stop himself from caressing his darling's freckled cheeks and be mesmerized at how appealing he was as he slept. "I'm sorry," Katsuki whispers so softly, his voice breaking. He felt so fng shitty. The euphoria that came after their NTR-CRS quickly diminished. How can he even F Izuku like that when his mind was a total mess? How could he? How hypocritical was that? He releases a rigged breath. "I'm sorry for not understanding what you've wanted." He bites his lip. "I'm sorry for not doing what you've desired for the past 5 years." He gives out a choked sob. "But I'm begging you. Deku, don't fall out of love with me." He left their bed, glad that Izuku was still soundly sleeping. He makes sure to cover the greenette with the duvet, smiling once again at how adorable his lover was. He stood there, as if he was a lonely little sunflower, asking himself if he would ever be enough, if he would be like that flourishing bouquet of violet and white roses. Would he ever be enough? He asks himself how could be a better lover? How could he at least make Izuku feel loved like how those flowers did? Would him gifting Izuku in return be enough too? He didn't know. Because amidst the strong exterior, Katsuki was just a man who wanted to be worthy of Izuku's love. He sighs nonetheless, heading straight to their balcony and sitting on the edge. He sat there on the cold stone, gazing at the night sky of the busy city of Mizurufu. The stars were awake, the moon was covered by the clouds. This was his and Izuku's favorite thing to do when they were still children, and until now Katsuki still loved it. Their friendship started with Izuku giving him a little bud of dandelion, claiming that it resembled Katsuki. The blonde had cherished it well. Their friendship started strong when they were little, but it began souring when Izuku met other kids to befriend. Katsuki had always been a jealous boy. He would push Izuku away claiming, "Go to your other new friends. I don't want you anymore." He would cry in his mother's arms in secret after that, telling himself that Izuku had replaced him. It worsened in middle school. Katsuki was in his adolescence and there were things that he couldn't understand. Like how other girls and boys their age were gifting Izuku with heart-shaped letters and small candies. And Izuku would thank them with a warm smile that it confused him. Why were they giving Izuku those things? What were those and why did Izuku treasure them? But nonetheless he let it be and continued on with his life. Yet it all went downhill in UA, specifically after the war. He knew he loved Izuku then. He had pined for Izuku for almost 2 years, the first year being in denial and the second trying his best to court Izuku. He never gifted him anything, and realizing it now, it must have been the reason why Izuku never realized Katsuki's intentions. The blonde would listen to his stories at night, he would walk with Izuku after class, he would embrace him when he had nightmares, he would come with Izuku when he decides to go shopping, he would be there, always be there for Izuku. That was the love Katsuki understood and had grown up with. No gifts or anything. Thus, at graduation, Katsuki remembers it all too well. The lights on the ceiling were dimmed in the venue and his classmates were jumping in celebration. He was smiling too, happy to have finally finished a step towards his dreams. After all that's happened, he almost died back when they were second years, almost lost half of his face and eyesight. Special thanks to Eri for reverting him back. With a heart that's not his to own, Katsuki had always thought he wouldn't graduate nor make it, but here he was. Alive and happy. Beside him was Izuku, crying his heart out with a smile on his face. It took a while before Katsuki built up his courage, but at that very moment, he grabbed Izuku's face and kissed the heck out of him. He was a sloppy kisser, that's for sure, but it was understandable. He was a goddamn virgin boy after all. I did it because I effing love you. He screamed, glad that the graduation music was loud enough that it went unnoticed. Izuku's face was beet red and flush. You F what? Goodness, Katsuki loves him so much. Turns out Izuku was too clueless to realize that Katsuki was in love with him, and admitted that he cried at nights thinking that he would never have a chance with the blonde. It was a laughable matter to him now, but Katsuki had cherished it. He regretted not noticing Izuku's melancholic gaze when Katsuki gave nothing on their first anniversary or on their first Valentine. Katsuki was so wrapped up with his own idea of loving that he never cared about Izuku's own way of loving. Izuku, who always gifted him on every occasion, either be it a new Xbox or a brand new PlayStation or a Rolex accessory or his grand gifts in their bed, why did Katsuki never realize that they both have different ways of loving? Last week was actually the first Valentine that Izuku gave him nothing, and though it went unnoticed to Katsuki, it must have had a greater effect on the greenette. Katsuki sighs, his hands clenched into fists. Before he knew it, a certain greenette had already made his way beside him, limping a bit. His blanket was wrapped around himself as he fit himself beside Katsuki, putting his head over the blonde's shoulder. Katsuki made no effort to move. "Kaken!" Izuku calls out, taking his hand into his and intertwining them together. "You've been out of your head these days, what's happening to you?" Katsuki wanted to be straightforward and say that it was all Izuku's fault for accepting gifts from another suitor, but knowing his lover, Izuku must just be loving the fact that someone was gifting him, or maybe he was doing it out of courtesy, who knows. He wanted to say that he didn't know what to do, and that he's shifting blame after blame. He looks at Izuku before sighing, "Yeah, I've noticed that too," was what he had replied. "I know something's burdening you, tell me?" Izuku asks back, his voice still soft as always. When Katsuki made no effort to speak up, Izuku continued, "You know you can trust me, right? You've known me since forever, you know I can keep secrets. And it's better to let out feelings so we can at least talk it out. I've been dying to talk to you since the start of the year dash." Katsuki cuts him off with a grumble, Okay, stop muttering, goddammit, I'll talk. "Do you still love me?" Katsuki asks carefully, but he suddenly almost fell off the balcony at how hard Izuku had moved away from him. The greenette furrowed his brows, almost amused. "You're asking me that just after I let you me so hard I passed out." It was Katsuki's turn to blush. What a way to lift the mood. The greenette then nods, a smile on his face. "Of course I do. What kind of question is that?" Katsuki only shrugs. Izuku growls beside him, "Kachun?" trying his best to look menacing. Katsuki smiles before planting a kiss on the greenette's forehead. "That's all I needed to know, don't worry about me." He turned back, jumping off of the ledge and standing on his feet. The greenette hero seemed appalled as he snapped his head back, his green eyes trembling as he gazed at Katsuki. Izuku looked frightened. Are you starting to doubt my love for you?" he blurted out, his voice sounded almost too broken. Katsuki bit his lip, stopping himself from breaking and screaming all of his insecurities to his lover. He knew if he turned back he would admit every single thing he was feeling, but he wasn't ready yet. "Let's forget about tonight." He was a coward. He knew that well. Izuku jumped off the ledge and walked back inside. "What dash? You ask me about something like this and leave it off? I don't know what's happening to you," he screamed out, frustrated. Katsuki's fists clenched. "Let's just sleep, Deku." That seemed to only aggravate Izuku as he ran, using a percentage of his quirk, and just by a millisecond he was already in front of the blonde. The neon green currents in his eyes. "No!" the greenette yelled out. "We're going to talk about this whether you like it or not." Katsuki grits his teeth, trying his best to stay calm since he knew if they both screamed at each other they would achieve nothing. "For the love of God, Deku," he rasps out, "just forget it." Izuku shook his head, the tears in his eyes building up in his waterline. Katsuki knew Izuku well. And at the moment, he knew Izuku was heavily overthinking everything. Just tell me what's wrong, Kaken." Izuku walks close, his fingers still trembling. I can fix it, I always do. Is what I'm giving you not enough? Is that why you've been so distant?" Katsuki's heart started breaking as Izuku's tears fell. Katsuki couldn't say it aloud, but it was him who was not enough. It was him who never gave Izuku the flowers he always wanted. It was him who thought it was all right to leave their relationship as it was. It was him who never made an effort to know how Izuku loved. It was him who stayed in his comfort zone and remained there. He blames himself for everything. And the fact that Izuku was continuously taking another man's gifts was just thrown out of the window. Kaken, is my love for you lacking? Am I overworking myself so much that I haven't given you time anymore? He rasps out, quickly wiping away his tears as if to show he's still strong. Katsuki shook his head, sighing. Your supervisor's calling you. Katsuki blurts out as he points out to the vibrating phone on the bedside table. It was silent, but luckily he had noticed it. I'm going to catch some air outside. He mentions before walking past Izuku, ignoring his broken expression. He left Izuku in the middle of their emissary bedroom who looked broken, too broken for Katsuki's liking. His teary eyes and his cry for an answer was something he himself would never forget. Katsuki knew this was for the better. He had to calm down first since if they talked tonight, he knew they wouldn't go anywhere and he feared that the outcome would be both of them spiraling into nothing but confusion and hatred. It might as well end with a breakup, who knows? He sighs instead of screaming out in frustration. He leaves their apartment and heads towards the elevator outside, walking in nothing but his pajamas. He stands outside of the building, breathing in the cold spring air. And instead of looking at the skies as he always does, Katsuki looked at the ground accidentally. His eyes widened. Because there in the mini garden in front of the apartment building they lived in was a flower that differs from the rest, adding contrast to the lovely red camellias that were scattered all around with their green leaves and fragile stems. It was a yellow carnation. He wasn't a flower enthusiast, but out of all the flowers he knew, only a yellow carnation's meaning was he familiar with. So familiar he saw himself while staring at it. Katsuki kneeled down and took the bud of the flower on his palms, gazing upon it as if it was his mortal enemy. He had studied flowers as of late, but now that he had realized that Izuku adores receiving such gifts, Katsuki took time and began researching about the meaning behind them. He was confused at first, up until now, honestly. But amidst his studying, he had grown to despise one type of flower that grows beneath the sun, having the same color of it also. A yellow carnation. The flower signifies dissatisfaction and disappointment, and he compared it to himself. He was as pathetic as the flower. It was elegant on the outside, but the meaning behind it held a profound verse that he himself hated. He was so pathetic he couldn't even tell his own dilemmas to his boyfriend of 5 years. They should have been stable at this point of their relationship. Most couples already get married after their 3rd year, have kids in their 4th, and plan life ahead at the 5th. But here he was doubting everything he was capable of. He deemed himself as the embodiment of disappointment. Katsuki was doubting his ways of loving. He was doubting if everything he did was right, or did it ever satisfy his beloved, or did he ever do the bare minimum Izuku had wanted. Without even noticing it, the blonde hero had already returned to their shared apartment aimlessly, still holding the yellow carnation in his pale palm. He steps foot inside the large room, closing the door behind him and putting his slippers back to the rack beside the door. The apartment was already dimmed as the lights had been shut off sometime earlier. Katsuki just realized that it was already so early in the morning. He sighs before heading back to the room upstairs, and as he slowly steps on the staircase, half of him wishes for Izuku to be already asleep, yet the other half desires to see the greenette wide awake so they could continue their talk. Yet Katsuki didn't like the latter that much. As he opens the door to their bedroom, Katsuki sighs as he notices his lover already on the bed, his breath a bit labred, the outline of his eyes already swollen. He covered himself with a blanket, shivering on the bed as if it was winter. Katsuki stares at Izuku's lying form for who knows how long, and his eyes soften in a loving way. He knew he loved Izuku too much, but it wasn't his fault that he was starting to doubt himself, or was that even his own fault now? He walks towards the bed and dips on his knees, gazing silently at the hurt face Izuku held. Katsuki swallows guiltily. He never wanted to hurt his love, but here he was, giving him the confusing treatment. Katsuki blames himself for everything, but he didn't want to admit his patheticness to Izuku. He sighs nonetheless and leans down, placing a wet kiss on the smaller man's freckled cheeks and at the same time, combing his hair with his fingers softly. The greenette quickly relaxed in his hold, and slept more peacefully right after. Katsuki stayed awake the whole night, rethinking about his life choices and how greatly it affected his relationship with Izuku. Maybe he had been too selfish in the past years, thinking that he knew Izuku too well, deciding that everything was alright. Yet he didn't care to check if something was breaking, cracking on the thin ice he had set for them to stand on. He knew something must change, he needed to change. "You're not like the usual you, Izuku," Clark suddenly remarks, lifting himself off of the older hero before grabbing his tumbler on one of the benches of the gym. Izuku instantly chuckles, shaking his head, but still remains silent. The brunette raised a brow. He was clearly not a fan of Izuku's silent treatment. Thus, he walked over and squatted at the level Izuku was. The brunette was currently sitting on the ground after a 1v1 hand-to-hand combat with him. They were currently in the gym on the 3rd floor of Todoroki's agency, training with each other like they used to every single day. And though it was spring and the air was as fresh as it could be, Clark was sweating like some madman. But nonetheless, he might look tired on the outside, but he seeks this kind of thing. The intensity of battle always makes him pump up, especially since Izuku is there to train with him. He brings his hands together, and suddenly sprouts a red lily on the palms of his hands. It was blooming and healthy, and it was an eye-catcher. He made sure it was. He pushes it close to Izuku, which the latter simply took with a smile on his face. "You can tell me what's bothering you," the brunette reassured, scooting closer. "I may be younger than you or have less experience than you, but I deem myself as a great crowd pleaser. My friends back in the States also tell me that I'm an amazing listener." Izuku reaches for the brunette's curly hair and ruffles it softly, which earned a soft giggle from Clark himself. His soft green eyes make Clark's heart flip in his chest. The way Izuku's gaze linger on him is just so magical and ethereal. "Just some problems at home, you don't need to worry about it," Izuku replies before lifting himself on both his bare feet. He crosses his arms on his chest though, huffing with a cheeky grin. "What we need to talk about is your fighting skills though. I taught you the best ways to dodge an attack, and yet you relentlessly do not block it." The younger man stood before raising his 2 arms up. Can we please not talk about my pathetic performance? Pretty please?" Izuku just rolled his eyes away, before casting his eyes down as he went to the lockers right beside the bench near them. He picks up his water bottle before slumping down on the bench, then massages his forehead with eagerness. "But really, you can tell me what's bothering you. I won't snitch." Clark raised a hand up. The older hero finally looks up at him and sighed. He knew he needed someone to let out his feelings to, and though Katsuki was often the person he often rants to, he couldn't bring himself to even talk to him. "It's just about Kaken and I," he finally admits. He didn't notice how Clark's cerulean eyes twitched when he said Katsuki's name. Yet, ironically, Clark had already jumped and sat right beside him like a bolt of lightning. "Continue," he says with curiosity, making Izuku stifle his laugh a bit at the childish demeanor. "We're having a dispute. Maybe a bit of a rut, I don't know." Izuku shrugs. "I've noticed it lately, we don't even talk anymore like we used to." He sighs before looking at the brunette beside him with a desperate gaze. "Clark, do you think he's falling out of love with me?" The white man instantly snorts and brushes off his shoulders. "Fall out of love? With you? That blondie boyfriend of yours must be an idiot if he falls out of love with you. Like, how stupid can he possibly be? Izuku instantly glares at him. "He's still my boyfriend, Clark. No mean word dash." Clark didn't falter at the threat. "No, you don't understand. I've always admired you from afar and I don't like seeing you like this. And knowing that he's treating you unfairly dash." "You, unfairly?" "Yes," the younger man affirms. "You don't deserve dash." Izuku instantly slams the bench's backrest with his shoulders in anger, and it instantly makes Clark quiver and zip his lips. "Clark, please stop," Izuku commands, his glare almost too venomous. The younger man quickly bowed his head and nodded like a puppy. It even surprised Izuku that the said man had already practiced Japanese etiquette. "I apologize, I wasn't aware that I crossed my boundaries already," he says with a soft, guilty smile. But before Izuku could take the chance to reply, Clark instantly cuts him once more. But if he does fall out of love with you, that isn't your loss, Izuku." He suddenly pauses, pursing his lip. And besides, I am sure that there are more people deserving of you. There are more people who want you, Izuku. The brunette quickly sighs. He knew Clark wouldn't understand. If he lost Katsuki in times like this, that would be the greatest defeat in his life. Katsuki had been with him since the start, and losing him would be devastating. Just thinking about it makes Izuku tremble so much. He had loved Katsuki so much that losing him would be practically losing himself too. Izuku knows he wouldn't ever be able to bear it. He didn't want to waste all of the love they had in the 5 years they've been together, all of the laughter and smiles, and the moments Izuku cherished so much. He wouldn't be able to live without Katsuki, his best friend and lover. Who would be there when he wakes from working overtime? Who would kiss his cheeks every night and kiss him twice in the morning? Who would scold him when he gets too reckless in patrols or fighting villains? Who would pamper him on lonely nights? Who would cradle him amidst grief and sadness? Who would make him coffee in the afternoons when he gets sleepy while finishing paperworks? Who would look at him like he's the whole wild world? Who would shout the loudest when he receives an award from the hero agency or when he gets the top 1 rank? Who would pull him back to reality when he's too lost in pleasure to even speak? Who would he make love to when days are just too rough? Who would pamper him in the showers and caress his face as if he's the most precious being in the whole universe? Wasn't it just his Kaken? Yet Izuku still wondered. Was Katsuki not satisfied with their relationship? Was what Izuku gave still not enough? He can change just for him. But he didn't know where he went wrong. What about this? The brunette begins. Let me take you to dinner tonight, then. Just the 2 of us. Clark suddenly suggested, giving Izuku an innocent smile. Izuku's eyes instantly widened, and he felt a sudden chill crawl up his spine. Izuku warily stared at him. I'd love to accept, but Kaken and I always eat dinner together. The brunette huffs before taking Izuku's hand into his. Come. It will be fun, I promise. I would take your mind off of your boyfriend for a bit. The brunette quickly backs off, not liking how the younger hero had formulated his words. I can't go, all right? I have to go back home, Earl Dash. Clark shook his head. Please, please. He begs, pouting. I'll be going back to the States in a week, so having one dinner with me wouldn't hurt nor make a difference, right? He adds, still making puppy eyes. Izuku gulped at that, his hands trembling. When did this man, who he had been with for the past month, act so demanding? Was it because Izuku had spoiled him too much and had accepted every request he made? Where was the adorable young man who had given him tremendous amounts of flowers just so he could see him smile? It was as if a pure white rose was tainted with black ink, and it spread all around its petals until no white color had remained. Izuku had always hated black roses. He wanted something lighter, something pleasing to the eye, something relaxing and could take his burdens away. He desired for a flower that had the same color of the sun, a flower that would give him hope and a home. A flower that's misunderstood but stood out in a colored field. Something that would make him smile so quickly. A yellow carnation was what he had in mind. And Clark was no yellow carnation. Izuku didn't even have the time to deny, since refusing the plea once more would instantly give him guilt, especially since the brunette hero would go back to the States permanently after his 1-month duty and training in Japan with the symbol of peace. Clark had been one of his sweetest students in the agency, and Izuku couldn't bring himself to turn him down nor disappoint him. That wasn't who Izuku is, he was the symbol of peace. As much as Izuku despised the idea of breaking a promise he had made with Katsuki in the early start of their relationship, he didn't want to be seen as a neglectful friend who refused a single dinner. He and Katsuki would have dinner for the rest of their lives anyway, right? Right? Izuku's phone, which had been kept in a locker, vibrated 2 times. And sadly, the owner didn't even notice it as he seemed very distracted. A simple name was plastered on the open screen. Kaken with a small heart right after. From Kaken 5:06 p.m. I hope you don't have any emergency meetings, nerd. I have a little surprise for you. And don't panic, okay? Just come home after work. It vibrated once more. From Kaken 5:07 p.m. I love you so much. Katsuki did say that he'll change just for Izuku. The brunette lad brought him to some fancy place Izuku didn't even know existed. Its high ceiling walls and golden accents, with red curtains and marbled flooring. The tables were all circular, with a couple of chairs surrounding them with perfection. The cutlery were also gold in color, the plates were marble white, the wine glasses and teacups were so shiny Izuku could see his reflection on them. Everything was perfectly organized, it felt suffocating. It was something he and Katsuki would never like. Izuku bit his lip as he forked down the pasta on his plate, grimacing at the thick white sauce dripping from it and onto the plate. He wasn't a fan of pastas, yet for some reason he found it so appetizing now that he's with Clark. He couldn't hide the disinterest written all over his face, the grimace he tried to hide, the forced smiles he tried to suppress as the young brunette right in front of him mumbled stories after stories. He only talked about himself and never even gave Izuku a chance to say anything. Though the little moment gave Izuku enough knowledge to know why people dislike his mumblings, since he didn't like Clark doing it too. And the thought made him miss Katsuki more. The blonde hero would always listen to his stories, even if it was already late at night and his eyes seemed too droopy. Katsuki would keep himself awake until Izuku decides to finish his story, listening to every single word his mouth spews out like some kind of a devoted servant. The greenette bit his teeth more until he felt the pain seeping through. He didn't even have the chance to text nor call Katsuki since Clark was too persistent on both of them leaving after their work hours had ended, and Izuku couldn't lie that it frustrated him that the young man wasn't giving him any freedom. He hears Clark whine all of a sudden, "You don't seem interested, Izuku." "Oh, I just have a lot of things in my head." He lied, he didn't want to sound offensive. The white man paused and looked hesitant. The pain and jealousy was evident on his face. His eyes looked so hurt, and it bothered Izuku so much. The foreigner pouts his lips softly after, "Aren't you happy to be with me, Izuku?" The greenette's eyes widened in panic. He didn't want to act so stoic and unattentive. He feared that he may have hurt Clark's feelings because of his own worries, but Izuku tried to understand his own situation, and yet, the guilt of disappointing a young hero who's been an avid fan of him being neglected had begun drilling itself into his head. Izuku shook his head. "It's not like that, Clark. It's just that this dinner is very unexpected and I made plans with Katsuki." The brunette huffs as he rolled his eyes. "Kakin this, kakin that. When can it be Clark instead?" Izuku felt his guts suddenly turning. The guilt was eating him alive, but he couldn't blame himself for feeling this way. He tried to ignore the statement and shook his head. "He's my boyfriend, Clark. Of course, I'll worry about him." The brunette stayed silent, his eyes casted down on his seafood platter. His lips were pressed thin, his brows were furrowed, and his hands were gripping his utensils on the table. Clark sighed a long-suffering sigh. "I've been noticing it for a while now." Clark starts in a whisper. "You've been smiling less, you look so dull and unhappy, you act as if everything's fine back at your home. I've always seen you as a vibrant flower, one that's so amazing and mesmerizing that people can't stop staring at you." He pauses for a sigh, his eyes already so hollow in the inside. He looks up at Izuku now, his vibrant orbs filled with nothing but seriousness that was so different from his usual zealous expressions. "Pro-hero dynamite," he shakes his head. "Katsuki Baku himself is destroying you." Everything flashes in Izuku's eyes in an instant. How he had no choice but to agree with this sudden dinner and had to leave his lover without any texts or calls. How he suffered hours just so he could at least make the young hero happy. The greenette was so exhausted and drained already. Starting from his and Katsuki's misunderstandings to the hell of a confusion he had in the morning. It annoyed him to no end that a man, whom he had known for just over a month, was bad-mouthing his partner as if it was his true nature. Izuku abruptly stood up, angry and seething. His eyes were blazing a neon green color and his knuckles were having a rush of green currents. "Clark," he taunts, his voice heavy with rage. "I've respected you as my student and have cared for you tremendously, but don't you dare start talking like that about my boyfriend." He took his bags with force, taking off the coat on the back of his chair right after. He didn't notice the fear and regret in Clark's eyes, as if he didn't mean to say the words he had said beforehand. "Why, you don't know anything about Katsuki and I," he declares before leaving the restaurant Clark had dragged him into. And again, he wasn't even a fan of these kinds of venues. The classical music irritated him to no end, the smell of fresh air condition made his nose itch, the authentic food made him want to vomit, and the crazy rich people inside acting like some sophisticated delicacies made it worse. Going with the young hero was a mistake after all. The greenette rushed home quickly, using the legs he trained for so many years, yet he still deemed them too slow for his liking. Katsuki must have been waiting for him back at home. He ran so fast, using a percentage of his quirk down the busy streets. Some city folk were calling on him, likely wanting his attention, making such a fuss about their hero Deku being flashy once again. Izuku didn't even mind them a bit. He jumped high, the crackles of green lighting visible in the rooftops and on the clouds as he made his way to their apartment. The guilt was eating him alive. At first, he thought Clark's advances were all innocent, like some young avid fan wanting attention from their hero idol. Izuku quickly adored his childish acts, seeing a young insecure boy inside that large frame of his. Their friendship quickly blossomed into a familial one, Izuku could say. Clark started opening up to him as they got closer, spitting out a few details about his private life, until he admitted that he had a rough life back in the States. Being abandoned by his parents when he turned 18, being made fun of for having such a girly and weak quirk, and being an outcast for most of his life. The brunette was someone who can have a bright future. He was smart and talented, charismatic too. Thus, Izuku started being drawn towards him, out of pity. He saw a young boy, a little brother, who he can train. Izuku made it his goal to get close to the young man and show his support. He was Clark's favorite hero after all. He also did it so that Clark wouldn't be awkward when he's around. Foreign heroes often feel as if they're left alone in missions after all. Even Izuku felt like that in one of his international missions before. He started telling him all about his life too, his hardships, and advice that could give the hero a bit of courage, just like what All Might did to him back when he was a lot younger. Giving Clark a couple of life advice, and making Clark know more of his life would make them closer, and he knew if he continuously did that, the boy would trust him and would realize that he isn't alone. Thus, when he started gifting flowers, Izuku accepted it wholeheartedly. He deemed it as Clark's way of showing his gratitude. He praised the boy's quirk, calling it a gift and an ethereal blessing. Admitting that he always adored flowers and had always wished to receive one. But he didn't expect Clark to be so overly possessive and decisive over him. And as the days passed by, the worse it had gotten. He didn't expect such a change from that boy he treated like family. Reaching out to his pocket, Izuku instantly remembers that he left his phone in the lockers in the agency. He didn't even have the chance to open his phone as it was already dead. Katsuki must have been calling him non-stop. And it filled Izuku with more guilt. How could he do that to Katsuki? Yes, they had a big misunderstanding that even Izuku himself still can't put his mind into. But how could he do such a thing to Katsuki? He knew there was something wrong with the said man, and yet, here he was, forgetting everything and trying to stray his head away from it. However, though he didn't understand what Katsuki wanted, Izuku still wanted to fix it. There was no giving up nor breaking up. Izuku wouldn't dare let go of his love. As he makes his way to the open window of their apartment, Izuku quickly rushes inside. Quickly removing his shoes and throwing off his coat. The room was a bit dimmed, and it worried Izuku that Katsuki might have left to look for him. The living room sofa had different covers now, and the throw pillows covers were now colored with a rosy red color instead of the gray ones before. Their house was full of candle lights, the aroma of the scented one being lavender, hitting Izuku's nose softly. Everything was tidied up and cleaned, the flowers outside were tended as well. And the lights above had a tint of orange in them, making the atmosphere really calm and well. Very romantic. Izuku takes a few steps and looks over to the dining area covered by a wall dividing the living room from the kitchen. His eyes widened. Their dining area was redesigned completely, with the chairs now covered with long white cloths and red ribbons at the back. Their table too was full of lovely flowers and platters of food that Katsuki might have prepared himself. At the very front of the table was Katsuki, wearing a khaki long-sleeve polo shirt and a black tie to accompany it. His hair was gelled back, but it looked quite disheveled as of the moment. Izuku trembles on where he stood. The blonde's head was currently resting on the table, and he was soundly sleeping in those clothes he might have ironed by the way it only had a few wrinkles on it. Izuku only gazed at him with dread in his eyes. Had Katsuki been waiting for him since earlier? Izuku remembers the date. He trembles. Today was the day Katsuki confessed to him on their graduation. Today was their anniversary. And Izuku chose to have dinner with another man. Izuku couldn't feel his skin anymore. He couldn't sense anything as well. All he was hearing was his own labored breaths. He was hyperventilating and his anxieties were spiking up. He felt himself shaking with tremor, as his mind went haywire by the second. He was a terrible lover indeed, and the questions Katsuki had given him a day ago about their love might have been said because of how Izuku had treated him. Izuku couldn't forgive himself. Through the years of his and Katsuki's relationship, Izuku had realized that he would never be gifted by Katsuki, and well, he understood it and wholeheartedly accepted it. He didn't want to pressure Katsuki about the idea of gifting, even though Izuku's own love language was the latter. He had adored Katsuki's way of showing love, and it was more than enough for him. But still, seeing individuals receiving such appealing flowers from their partners made him a bit jealous. But not so much. His understanding heart kept itself secured. However, he didn't notice that he himself was making it a bigger issue. He didn't notice that it was taking a huge toll on him, and that the jealousy was already filling him up, and without realizing it sooner, Izuku had opened up his burdens to a new friend he had made, to pro-hero Thorns, or simply, Clark. He met the younger hero through an international mission half a year back, and the kid seemed so fascinated about him that he swore he'll go to Japan for a short visit. Izuku didn't mind, but he was happy that Clark had done his promise. Seeing him suddenly participating in a hero training program conducted by Todoroki himself was a surprise. A newfound friendship wouldn't hurt that much anyway. The more they spend time around each other, the closer they get. Izuku was happy that a familial bond was forming from their friendship. Eventually, they talked about his and Katsuki's relationship after every sparring session, with Clark insisting on Izuku talking about it, saying that it was a good way of releasing his own burdens, but their talks were mostly about Clark's life anyway. But nonetheless, Izuku found it as a way to release his feelings of disappointment in himself. He just wanted to not get frustrated at times when he doesn't receive a gift. He wanted to make himself understand that it wasn't Katsuki's nature to give a gift at all. The brunette hero began to give him small buds of flowers that he created himself as time passed, and Izuku had deemed it as his way of pitying Izuku about his own desires being unreached. Buds turned into several flowers, and those flowers turned into bouquets, and while Izuku had adored receiving them from a kid he had adored as well, he didn't notice that Clark had ulterior motives after all. Because how could he not? Izuku himself was giving himself away, and he was giving Clark such mixed signals. How stupid could he be not noticing that he was already giving a man the attention he was supposed to give to his lover? Izuku quickly speeds up and kneels in front of Katsuki, who already seemed to have felt the thumps on the floors made by his footsteps. The blonde slowly opened his eyes as Izuku laid his chin on Katsuki's clothed lap, wetting the black slacks with big droplets of his tears. "Deku, you're here," he whispers, his tone full of relief. And it even made Izuku cry harder. Had he been cheating on Katsuki without even realizing it? Have he been making Katsuki feel as if he was being replaced by the dozens of flowers he had put inside their house which were all given to him by another effing man? How could he do this to Katsuki? Izuku couldn't speak. Katsuki reached for his face and caressed it slowly. His eyes were still a bit droopy. "Why are you crying, dumbass?" The blonde chuckles. "Did you cry 'cause my surprise is so grandiose?" Izuku sniffs, burying his face on Katsuki's lap, sobbing more. "No," he hiccups. "It's because I forgot. Tonight." Katsuki laughs more, but it's still softer than his usual. "Oh, you dummy. I should have told you about it a bit earlier so it could have matched with your schedule," he says, his eyes casted down as if he was terribly disappointed in himself. Izuku still couldn't speak as he continued crying his heart out, his heart thundering his chest so loud Izuku expected himself to faint. Why was Katsuki blaming himself when it was all Izuku's fault? With Katsuki's sleepy state, Izuku just hopes that he thinks he's crying because he forgot their anniversary, not because he had other errands today, Or how he spent all hours of their goddamn anniversary with another man that might have been making his boyfriend insecure. He didn't want Katsuki to know about the dinner that had happened beforehand. He didn't want to make Katsuki more betrayed nor insecure than he already was. Izuku was so terrified. He just wanted to feel safe in his Kaken's embrace. Thus, Izuku stood and sat on the blonde's lap, putting his head on the blonde's shoulder and wrapping his arms both around the larger man's torso. He feels Katsuki chuckle and purr lightly, "It's past 12, but happy belated anniversary, Deku." He chuckles again before wrapping his arms around Izuku tighter. Izuku sobs more, trembling. "I bought you a bouquet now, huh? But I'm still getting the hang of it." Katsuki utters, obviously lightheaded with how honest he was being. "You told me you loved chrysanthemums, right?" "Yes, so I searched everywhere in the city just so I could find one, and luckily, I found one in the borders of Shizuoka Prefecture." Izuku's eyes widened as he gasped at the same time. Katsuki spent all of his day finding flowers for him. The borders of the city were kilometers away from the inner city of Mizudafu. Katsuki must have been searching everywhere just for these flowers. It also explained why he seemed so exhausted. "But enough of my iffy stories," he shrugs before planting a kiss on Izuku's forehead. "You seem tired already, Izuku. Let's just go to bed," he suggests, adding a soft smile. Izuku immediately shook his head, pointing at the platter of dishes on the table. But the food, Kaken. I don't want to waste everything you've prepared." Katsuki smiled, laying his head on Izuku's shoulders and closing his eyes, grumbling once more in exhaustion. "We can reheat it tomorrow, and I'll make you a one-of-a-kind breakfast you'll never forget," he declares before finally drifting away, snuggling close to Izuku's warmth. This was Katsuki's love language. How could Izuku even ask for more? How could he betray his Kaken? Izuku didn't know what to do. His eyes cascaded to the side accidentally, and the sight of 2 flight tickets on the table hidden under a porcelain plate was what surprised him. There were also paperworks about requested day-offs, and it was signed by Katsuki himself. It seemed as if Katsuki planned everything beforehand. A dinner for their anniversary, a most wanted vacation, but Izuku couldn't even smile. The guilt was on the pit of his stomach, bubbling and burning his entire core. "Do you still love me?" He remembers Katsuki asking while sitting on their balcony, solemnly looking at him as if he's the whole world. "Yes." Izuku answers now, trembling so hard and crying pathetically. "You don't deserve to be treated like this." Izuku continues sobbing, gripping his palms. "But I can't turn back in time and fix it." The 2 lovers remained in the dining area of their home, both seated on one chair, with one sleeping peacefully in exhaustion and the other being eaten by extreme guilt. The lights of their house were dimmed, with the open refrigerator being the only source of a brighter light they had. The flowers on their balcony seemed to have wilted already, just like Izuku's heart. How long till Katsuki knows about what Izuku had done? How long till Katsuki creates his judgment? How long till Izuku meets his consequences? How long till the chrysanthemums that were full of love wilt too in betrayal? I'm so sorry." Izuku cried on his boyfriend's chest. His eyes were still red and his cheeks were very puffy from last night's crying session. The blonde hushes him softly, shaking his head. It took at least an hour before Izuku could sleep last night, and well, he actually barely slept at all as he was met with extreme nightmares that made him wake up from time to time. And though he found it annoying, he deemed it as a mere punishment for the sin that he had done to Katsuki. When he had woken up, the sun had completely risen and the smell of pancakes had already filled their home. He then noticed that he was in their bedroom. A bit confused since he remembers sleeping in their dining room. However, realizing that Katsuki was not by his side made Izuku bolt up fast, terrified that the blonde might have already known his secret and had left when he woke up. Thus, Izuku ran downstairs to check, his heart pounding his chest. But Katsuki only stood there with his green apron and tied-up hair, plating the breakfast he had promised to make last night. Izuku gulps right there before greeting Katsuki with a forced smile, trying to hide the tension and guilt. They ate in silence at first as both of them didn't know what to say to each other, but eventually, the tears that Izuku had kept poured down on his face as he took a bite of the pancakes, And before Katsuki panics about why the greenette was suddenly crying, Izuku jumps on his chest for an embrace, apologizing. Izuku purses his lip, digging his face onto the blonde's neck to smell Katsuki's sweet scent. He had almost forgotten what Katsuki smelled like because of the dozens of flowers in their house. I left our conversation open-ended that night when you were demanding we talk. You didn't deserve the silent treatment at all. Katsuki admits, his eyes casted down, but his hands were still soothing Izuku's back. I've just been doubting myself lately. He shrugs. Izuku trembled and almost gasped. How could he been so stupid? How could he be so blind to not see the man he knew best suffering right beside him? I'm sorry I didn't notice that, Kaken. He utters, sniffing. Have I not been good to you? I must have been such a terrible partner. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I should have been bet dash. Katsuki silenced him with a soft kiss all of a sudden. If I hear you apologizing again, I won't make you pancakes anymore next time. Izuku shuts completely. The threat of not having to eat Katsuki's cooking has always been one of his strongest fears. It's not your responsibility to know that, Deku. I should have been the one fixing that myself dash. No. That's not true. Izuku interrupts. We should be helping each other out, right? We should be knowing our own secrets and problems, right? He tries to convince, but his voice has failed him. Izuku tried his best to act truthfully because though he meant all of those words, he still deemed himself to be a hypocrite. Katsuki knew all his secrets, but the most current one, that dinner that had happened last night, Izuku knew he would keep it to his grave. Katsuki smirks at him, chuckling a bit. Sappy. But he stayed silent right after. Finding it as a signal to continue, Izuku scoots more, facing Katsuki directly. Now tell me and be truthful to me, why did you suddenly act so differently in the past few weeks? Why did you suddenly doubt us? Katsuki seemed hesitant, yet Izuku didn't care. He wanted to know everything and he wasn't patient. The blonde sighs knowing that Izuku wouldn't stop until he spits the truth out. I've just been doubting if you do deserve me. Izuku's eyes widened. Kirishima and the others had mentioned that I should be more NTMT to you, and that I should act more like a lover. One that should give you flowers on every occasion, one that should give you gifts and take you on trips and dates. He sighs, looking away from Izuku. Oh, Kaken. Katsuki reaches for his hand, squeezing it. Why, you know how I am, Death? I don't know anything about that at all. Izuku embraced the blonde instantly, the tears from his eyes falling once again. He sobs loudly, regretting everything that he had said to Clark. He shouldn't have been jealous of other people receiving gifts from their partners. He shouldn't have doubted Katsuki at all. Why, you don't have to change for me, Kaken. He remarks, to which he trembles at the sudden sob Katsuki had released. What kind of a lover am I if I wouldn't jump to new things just for you? I want to try out and explore stuff, Deku. He declares softly, digging his face on Izuku's neck. 'Cause, how can we grow as a couple if we don't cross boundaries? Dedication has always been part of Katsuki's love language, after all. Though Izuku did want to agree with Katsuki, he knew that his own guilt would keep him imprisoned. After their small breakfast, both of them seemed to have been refreshed. Katsuki finally joined him in the showers, and they laughed about petty things and debated about heroic topics out of pure joy once again. Not even once had they held each other with lust in their eyes. No, they were free. They were smiling, laughing, forgetting about everything as the water from the showerhead wet their bodies. Both had also tackled about the trip that Katsuki had arranged, and much to Izuku's dismay, Katsuki had stated that it would be a surprise and that they still needed to be on duty this afternoon. He tried to cancel their work for a whole week but only got 5 days, sadly. Izuku had convinced himself that he would forget everything that had happened between him and Clark, and though he was clueless about what was happening at first, what he did was still infidelity in his own perspective. His father, Hisashi, was a cheater himself, and Izuku had hated him all of his life, yet he had done the same. Furthermore, Izuku had changed his patrol schedule for the day, making sure to not meet Clark in his duty hours. He needed to be stress-free for the night. He needed to focus on his and Katsuki's upcoming trip. No more distractions, just him and his kaken. But as soon as he met Ochako after her patrol in the north side of Mizudafu, Izuku ran to her and cried. And well, long story short, but Izuku soon found them together in a private cafe downtown, and he eventually started spilling everything to her and even, "You accepted flowers from him. Are you insane, Deku?" Izuku groaned aloud but nodded guiltily. Why am I just knowing about it now? He knew she would be hysterical. Ochako took a large sip of her matcha frappe first, releasing a big frustrated breath after. Gosh, Deku-kun. How can you be so naive? Izuku stayed silent, taking Ochako's scolding to heart. If you loved receiving flowers, you could have hinted or told Bakugo yourself. You're both such romantic disasters. I didn't want to pressure him, okay? And I already accepted that he wouldn't ever do the dash. Ochako cuts him off, and he just gave you a bouquet yesterday. She deadpants. Izuku pouted but stayed silent. But anyway, why would you repeatedly accept flowers from another guy? Ochako screams, pulling her hair. Izuku didn't have time to reply as she continued, and flaunt it around in front of Bakugo? I thought Clark gave you flowers once, Deku-kun. It's just that dash. Izuku pauses, knowing that his explanation still wasn't deemable. I always saw Clark as a student, a kid who has high dreams. Him giving me flowers was just as similar to those children who gave me flowers in the park. He continues, when I called you the night he gave me another bouquet, I truly thought he was just thanking me for teaching him. Ochako sighs once more before putting her chin on her palm, but he's a grown-but man, Deku. It's so obvious that he likes you. Izuku bit his lip, cringing, yeah, I just realized that too. He grips his hair, I want to forget everything, Ochako-chan. He cries, sipping his strawberry milkshake. Ochako furrows her brow in empathy. She then scooted her chair over to him and hugged him close, letting him cry on her shoulder knowing that Izuku needed support from people he cared for most. Talk to Bakugo, Deku-kun. Izuku immediately snapped back. It wasn't necessarily cheating, but if the guilt is bothering you, you must admit it to him. Communication matters most, I've always reminded you about that. She convinces, trying to change his mind about keeping it a secret. But still Izuku shook his head. I can't, I don't want him to be hurt, I don't want him to doubt me again. He knew their communication had declined in the past years because they haven't met problems this big before. It was Ochako's time to shake her head. You both know each other so perfectly that you think you don't need to communicate your feelings to each other anymore. That's the danger of loving too deeply, Izuku. The strength in Ochako's expression and voice sent chills to Izuku's spine. You think you already know what's going to happen, you're scared that Katsuki would leave you. Those intrusive theories of yours would destroy everything. Izuku still shook his head, sobbing. Ochako sighs, patting his back. Talk to him about it. He loves you, Deku. Trust me. Katsuki felt something off with his dearest lover, though he smiled with teeth and all, Izuku's eyes screamed something more, as if they hid something. Although Katsuki kept telling himself that it might be just his imagination attacking him again, there was still something eerie in their atmosphere that his heart feared, something that Katsuki couldn't put a finger to. They traveled far beyond the city, going by economy class instead of traveling on coach since Katsuki knew that Izuku hated such expensive, unnecessary additions. Nonetheless, he very much enjoyed the time they spent on the plane even though some children took pictures of them and some fangirls begged them for autographs. He loved how their hands touched each other on several occasions, he adored Izuku's sleeping face, he adored Izuku's warmth right beside him too. He might be acting like some high school girl but oh well, love could change the coldest of hearts, as they say. Landing, both of them quickly caught on at a bus terminal and rode a relatively yellow small one full of approximately not more than 15 people. They sat side by side on the very back seats, Izuku's head resting steadily on his shoulder. He felt loved, warmth even, while he occasionally glanced across the window where the urban roads slowly turned into rural fields, and into grass-green lands where the flower fields bloomed graciously and the yellow and orange flowers swayed with the wind. The breeze was cool to touch and the wind blew perfectly through the opened window. It didn't take long for the both of them to arrive at their destination, and once they found their inn to stay in, Izuku immediately placed his bags down and ran outside, going by the short cliff to gaze at the lush flowers that spread just outside of the inn. "But, Kaken, I never thought you'd bring me here," he exclaims, eyes shone with joy. Katsuki smiled warmly, victorious that he finally made Izuku happy for once. He knew that the dinner he had set for their anniversary night was a complete failure, and he ought to try once again to at least make up for the lost time he gave Izuku. Yet now that he stood there gazing at the greenette whose hair was fluttering with the wind, and face as joyous as it can be, Katsuki finally felt proud of himself. "Sir, should I bring your belongings to your room?" A lady suddenly cuts in, pointing to the luggage they left on the lobby floor. Katsuki nodded his head at the staff and simply went ahead, walking to his lover who stood by the fence. "The fields had bloomed fully since we last visited," Katsuki points out. Izuku nods. "I remember it as if it happened yesterday. I can't believe it's been over 20 years ever since." Katsuki chuckles before reaching for the smaller lad's hand. "How does nostalgia feel now that you're ancient?" The greenette rolls his eyes and scoffs loud in return. "We're just in our mid-20s, Kaken. Stop acting as if I would be needing medication tomorrow." The blonde cackled after as he fully intertwined their fingers together. Katsuki looked around once more, and a sense of nostalgia hit him deeply. The flower plains were a special place for the both of them, having shared so many memories on the field they're currently gazing at. Katsuki and Izuku cherished the place as if it was their second home. Masaru and Mitsuki used to bring Izuku along on their family trips here when he was younger, and though Katsuki had detested quite viciously, he did secretly request for Izuku to come by the next trips his family had in the past. The flower plains in the rural areas of Hokkaido were where Katsuki's grandparents once lived. They often visited them during summer breaks and in winter breaks. Katsuki loved his old fellows fully, and he remembers how they often tried to read his fortune just by looking at his palm. Although he hated it when they teased him, telling him that Izuku would not be his husband in the future. His folks often brought him here for vacations, and his grandparents, as always, welcomed him with open arms. They loved everything about him, might be because he was their only grandchild from his mother's side. Katsuki doesn't really care about his father's side of the family as most of them are absent on reunions and his life anyway. Mizuki and Sano, his mother's parents, his grandparents, might have been the reason why he was so spoiled in life. They weren't exactly rich, but they gave Katsuki every ounce of love and knowledge he is still carrying until now. "Gosh, I miss Grandma Mizuki's katsudon. She often cooked for me whenever I went here." I also completely blamed her for my addiction with katsudon. Izuku exclaims, still smiling. Katsuki huffs, acting as if he's seriously annoyed. "Mine's still better." Izuku rolls his eyes again before scooting over to Katsuki, reaching for his face and squishing his cheeks apart. "Such a possessive man you are," he teases, resulting in Katsuki blushing hard and looking away. "Of course, your katsudon is still the best of the best." Katsuki tried to grin proudly, but his eyes shone with adoration. The silence popped so suddenly, Katsuki only stared at Izuku whilst his hands were still on his cheeks, and the greenette seemed to be savoring holding his boyfriend's face. Not that Katsuki minded anyway. But Katsuki knew there was something wrong in their atmosphere, something so heavy yet he couldn't even feel it. "Kaken, can I tell you something?" "Deku, I want to tell you something," they both said at the same time, much to their surprise. Izuku stifled his laugh under him before signaling him to go on first, waving his hands forward to sign him to speak up. It took a second before Katsuki could speak. There was something wrong with how Izuku smiled. What was he going to say anyway? Katsuki sighed, ignoring his thoughts. We should." He starts, gulping, finding his words stuck on the back of his throat. Izuku pet his head. We should. Talk more?" He utters, nervous, he wasn't even sure. Izuku raised a brow. "Aren't I talkative enough?" The blonde groaned. "Not that, idiot. I mean like deep talks or whatever they call it. I want to be able to talk about things we don't like, or he gulps once more, things we want from each other. We've been just walking by each other's side without caring about anything, He finishes, releasing a harsh breath after. We really should. Izuku quickly whispers, we've been by each other's side for so long we thought that we could understand each other without communication. He chuckles softly right after. Katsuki rolled his eyes playfully as if lifting up the mood. We've been misunderstanding each other these days and it's getting on my goddamn nerves already, nerd. Izuku turned a bit as he continued laughing, but it eventually died down after seconds. His eyes still gave something more than meets the eye as he fluttered them close. Just remember our love and our journey together if things get too doubtful. Katsuki only gazed at him nonchalantly as the calming silence filled their atmosphere. Why did Izuku tremble as he said that? What are you going to tell me about, anyway? Katsuki cuts, swiping his thumb softly on Izuku's bouncy cheek. God, he missed holding his lover like this. He missed the nights where he held Izuku without the heaviness in his heart. He truly missed loving Izuku to the fullest of his capacity. Nothing important. Izuku awkwardly laughs. Anyway, why don't we ride those horses stationed in the inn? There was something wrong indeed. The two spent the entire day exploring the fields outside said inn, full of roses and dandelions with tulips at north, and some other ones Katsuki didn't know what. The flowers were tall and well-groomed, releasing a fresh scent to the air that he actually felt comfortable with. Most of the time they took breaks by laying themselves flat on the ground. Izuku would start talking about nonsense, but Katsuki adored him because of that, how he told his stories with such feelings, how his eyes glint bright when he gets to the interesting parts, how his cheeks turn red because of the heat of the sun, how he smiles so warmly in silence. Katsuki did ask himself sometimes if what he was doing was all right. The rapid change he was doing for their relationship was so new to him that it was hard for him to grasp a thing at the first tries, but as he lets himself loose, he then realizes that though it seems really hard, loving Izuku was worth it. Because nothing makes him happier than seeing his beloved smile, and of course, he'll do everything just to witness that. They rode the horses they rented from the inn to the cliff, deciding to watch the sunset on the horizon. The hues of blue and orange exploded in the sky as if it was a painting, and though it was very mesmerizing to look at, Katsuki didn't even care to glance at it. Izuku looked more appealing than the sky. His emerald eyes were blown wide, his lips were slightly agape, and his cheeks were red as he stared at the skies. The nerd had always been amazed by little things. Is this your first time seeing a goddarn sunset? Katsuki teases, kicking his black stallion's abdomen softly, making it move closer to Izuku's white mare. The greenette smiles though and sighs with the breeze. It's my first time watching a sunset with you this year though. There was a sudden rush of guilt that stuck in Katsuki's gut as he remembers how much they had neglected each other in hopes of fixing their own dilemmas, which they could have just done together. Izuku reached for his hand though, startling Katsuki. We should do this often, Kaken. What do you think? The blonde nonchalantly hums, yeah, I agree. We're both burning our heads by being workaholics. That made the greenette stifle his laughter. The two were enveloped by a deep silence once more. Their feet were already aching and their legs were getting numb from walking miles. Luckily, the horses did help them a lot. Katsuki didn't mind the aches though. He deemed their travel as a very enjoyable one. He knows that he can strain every part of his body just for Izuku alone anyway. The two decided to return to the inn by the time that the sun had settled down and wasn't seen in the horizon anymore. Although they are very lucky that the skies are still bright, since if not then they'll have a hard time navigating through the dark rocky roads. The next day was just as similar, but the two decided to explore the inn. Their legs were still aching when they woke up, and Katsuki didn't even have the energy to scold Izuku for not replacing his sweaty dirty clothes with clean ones, since he did forget to change too when they got to their rooms. They must have fallen on the bed as soon as they reached their shared king-size bed. It was already afternoon when the couple had decided to come down to the inn's restaurant for a heavy meal. Their stomachs were already begging for food since they hadn't eaten anything yesterday. Everything went on so smoothly and Katsuki was so joyous that everything was flowing according to his plans. Izuku seemed so happy and he himself was happy too. The skies were bright, the staff were nice to them, and though there were visitors in the inn, the commoners did respect their privacy even though they knew that they were very well-known heroes from the city. They talked about a lot of things in the 2 days they've been together, and Katsuki made sure to write down everything in his head. He was just glad that they both knew that they've been really neglectful of each other. You should have told me you like flowers in general, stupid. Katsuki comments, but I should have known too. No. Izuku quickly cuts in. It's my fault. I should have understood you first. Katsuki groans. Deku, for the last time, stop apologizing. The greenette remained snarey. I didn't want you to give me anything, to be honest. He cuts off instead. I'm aware that it isn't your thing. Katsuki furrowed his brow. Then why accept flowers from that guy? His voice cracked slightly in the end. Izuku gazes first at his confused red eyes before caressing his face with a hand. In accordance with what Ochako had said, Katsuki did get jealous of Clark. Izuku gulps though, remembering everything that happened between him and Clark. A sudden chill crawled his spine once more. Ichi was just a young hero that I trained. Nothing more, nothing less. The flowers were a symbol of appreciation only, Kaken. He lies. God, he didn't know how to tell the truth. He was shaking so much, he wanted to spit everything out, but it remained at the back of his mouth. Izuku took Katsuki's impending silence as a chance to speak more. I've always seen him as a boy, like Koda for example. He was like a younger brother to me, Kaken. He saw Clark like that, but he realized soon enough that Clark held something else for him. I have nothing against the kid, Kaken. Izuku gulps once more, remembering the dinner, remembering the flowers he had accepted wholeheartedly, remembering everything that he thought was all right. He wanted to forget it all. Katsuki seemed to have understood everything now as he laid his head low on Izuku's shoulder and sighed before humming. Just don't accept those flowers from him so freely, all right? I have a bad feeling about him. Izuku couldn't agree more. And thus, both vowed that they would make up to each other starting from now on under the starry night sky of the balcony of the inn. Maybe Izuku could keep what happened still as a secret? But he knew he had to admit it one day. The night of the third day was something else for Katsuki himself. They returned to the inn after hiking on the near mountainside, and though their bodies were already sore, there was something that burned in Katsuki's core as he saw Izuku unbutton his shirt and the rolling sweat that dribbled alongside it. He had come to realize that they haven't touched each other for quite a while now, specifically for a few months. And God, Katsuki missed having Izuku's burning skin on his. The two stumbled into their room, their clothes still damp from sweat. Katsuki couldn't help but hungrily take Izuku's mouth on his, swiping his tongue inside until Izuku's knees felt weak. He smirked. He holds Izuku with an arm on the small of his back. What is it, my love? Izuku looked at him with pleading and desperate eyes, shouting to be taken, to be fed. Well? Katsuki continues, slipping his hand through Izuku's shorts and squeezing his bum, earning a loud from the greenette. Izuku gasps loudly, pulling Katsuki closer. Take me? Thus, one thing escalated to another, and though the night was still young, the lovers found their way to their king-sized bed, breathing in deep breaths, and gazing at each other so heavily. You look so effing appealing. Katsuki compliments, swiping his tongue on the greenette's neck, which had earned him a good loud The greenette seemed to be full blown out in lust now, though their clothes were still intact. It irritated Katsuki. The heat of the room was getting deeper as the seconds passed by. Kaken. Izuku stutters out, drawing a loud once more as Katsuki goes in for a deep kiss. The blonde was the one who broke their kiss off, as usual. The greenette always turns into a puddle of goo in such intense moments. Everything was going perfect. Katsuki removed his shirt and tossed it on the side. He then grabbed the hem of Izuku's button-up and carefully removed it, knowing that it was Izuku's favorite polo and he can't have that polo being ripped to pieces. The blonde smirked, lowering down his gaze, looking at Izuku's beauty, ready to finally indulge, to finally pleasure Izuku again for the night. But his eyes suddenly widened. They trembled. Katsuki immediately backed off. His eyes held such intensity as he gazed wide on Izuku's exposed skin as if it held something toxic. He couldn't believe what he was seeing at all. Wide vine markings embed themselves on Izuku's waist. They seemed so fresh, like it just appeared a few days ago. They encircled Izuku's skin as if it was meant to be there, red and bright with some purple bruises scattered more underneath his trousers. Katsuki only gulps, feeling the sudden rush of panic enter his head. Izuku blinks at him a few times, a bit confused at why he suddenly pushed him off. "Kaken?" he asked, moving closer. Katsuki backed away, betrayed. Why are there vine marks on your waist?" There was only one man he knew that could create vines similar to that. Katsuki gasped, suddenly realizing everything. Did he offend touch you?" he asked, the tears already filling in his waterline. Katsuki gulps, his breaths uneven. "Explain this to me, I swear to God, Deku." He screams, standing up from the bed. What he didn't expect was for Izuku to come crying before him, apologizing so suddenly. Katsuki expected a different result. Betrayal never hurt this way until now. Nothing else seemed right anymore, even for Katsuki himself. Yet the room was well lit with accented traditional drapes and lanterns. The large king-sized bed under them was still as clean as snow and only had a few wrinkles on the duvet. The floor was carpeted and soft to their feet, clean and washed. The night was too young. The wind blew strong yet so calm at the same time. Everything seemed perfectly fine too. And yet it wasn't at the same time. His tears had stopped themselves in the corners of his eyes as if they were holding onto the last string that was keeping all of his clustered and exploding thoughts to himself, trying their best to hold on before finally breaking down, just like how Katsuki was at the moment. He was trembling, he knew that well, and as he unconsciously stepped back with betrayal, hurt, and confusion written all over his face, only one question came out of his dry lips. It's not true, right? Tell me it's not if and true, Deku." He asks for confirmation, his lips trembling. The greenette stayed on the bed, on his knees as if he was already begging for forgiveness, his sobs loud enough that it echoed inside the en-suite bedroom. He looked pitiful, with his hair wet and his hands trying to find something to grip onto. His tears were cascading on his cheeks, and rolling down until it reached the blanket covering his almost naked body. His cheeks were red, his eyes were already swollen, his knees seemed numb. When Izuku shook his head slowly, as if hesitating, something inside Katsuki shattered. "No!" Katsuki whispers, emitting a sudden laugh of disbelief after. "You wouldn't do that, right, love? You wouldn't do that to me, right?" He leans down on the bed, putting his knee on the soft mattress before reaching Izuku and gripping both his shoulders tightly, stopping himself from shaking the greenette. However, his question was still left unanswered as Izuku was still heavily crying, shaking his head as he muttered his apologies. Katsuki abruptly stands, trying to lift Izuku with him. "For God's sake, Deku. Answer me, God damn it." He cuts with a rasp of breath. "I'm begging you, explain everything to me, please. What happened? What did you do? Izuku, please, I'm begging you." It was too late before Katsuki had realized that tears were already spilling down on the sides of his cheeks, cascading in a slow manner. His gaze held such intensity, a feeling of dread and with a mix of a small hope. His heart was beating too loud as he held Izuku in his grip. Katsuki knew he was overthinking too much. His thoughts had gone haywire, he was confused, he was scared, he was overwhelmed, he was everything in between. The greenette finally looks up at him at last, yet Katsuki finds Izuku's eyes holding a heavy kind of guilt. Katsuki was dreading what would come out of Izuku's mouth. I'm sorry, Kaken. I'm so sorry. Why? You didn't deserve any of this. What I did was too much and I have no excuse." He rasps out, his voice cracking mid-sentence. He loses balance, then immediately falls onto Katsuki's broad chest, and warmth instantly blooms through their contact. Katsuki didn't think twice and held Izuku with trembling hands. "Tell me, Izuku, please." I didn't want to do it, Kaken. Never wanted to hurt you, I never wanted to burden us both, I never wished for this. I didn't mean that to happen at all." Katsuki esged his breath in before biting his lip hard. "Is it Clark?" he simply asks. He knew the answer already, but there was nothing to lose in asking. When he heard Izuku sob louder, it felt as if Katsuki had just lost everything, his arms falling onto his sides, letting go of Izuku and moving away from the warmth. It felt like time had suddenly slowed down and made Katsuki feel every crack his heart had done. I love you, Kaken. Izuku continues, trying to reach him again. I have no right to say any excuse. I know I should have said this sooner, but it scared me. I was so scared of telling you what exactly happened. My own actions terrified me, Kaken. The blonde was silent thus. Izuku continued, trying to gather himself up on his feet, trying to get closer to Katsuki. It scared me knowing that I've betrayed you like this, that I've been with another man on our anniversary and kept everything from you. I've been horrible to you. I didn't tell you what I want. I didn't consider what you'd feel. He grips his hand now as he tries to breathe. Katsuki huffs softly, his brows furrowing in hurt. That's why you were late. He was trying so hard not to cry. But God, it hurts so bad. What else? He sees Izuku gulp. But the flowers he gave, the gifts he gave, God, I don't even know how to explain myself. Izuku tears his gaze away. Katsuki scoffs to himself. Was he this pathetic now? Listening to the story of his lover cheating on him from his own mouth. Thinking about everything that happened, why Izuku had been accepting those gifts wholeheartedly, how he loved every single one of it, how it seemed as if he was blatantly showing it off in front of Katsuki. So it was because Izuku was having an affair? Katsuki couldn't believe it himself. Katsuki didn't want to believe it. Katsuki loves Izuku so f***ing much. A full silence envelopes the room, and the thick layer of tension seemed to be almost visible. Katsuki and Izuku just stood there in front of each other, with the brunette gazing at Katsuki as if he wanted something from the blonde while the blonde himself seemed so void. Another minute passed by, and Izuku had grown impatient waiting for Katsuki's reply. Kaken, please say something. Izuku begs in a desperate voice, which had made Katsuki gaze upon him in an instant. His sudden demeanor changed much to Izuku's surprise. His red ruby eyes screamed anger, nothing but anger and betrayal now. Katsuki shrugs aggressively, throwing his hands exaggeratedly. What? What do you want me to say? Katsuki shrugs again. Do you want me to say that I'm so effing happy for you? Do you want me to lie, is that it? Katsuki retorts back, the aggression shaking Izuku off his trance. No, Kaken. The blonde cuts him off. Then, what the hell do you want me to say, Izuku? Do you want me to write you a poem about how? Katsuki immediately purses his lip, his expression suddenly changing from aggression to hurt. He gasps before shedding steady tears. How hurt I am. Is that it? He asks, voice once again trembling. So what? All this time you were lying to my goddamn face? Acting as if you agree with everything? Promising heavy vows in front of me? Katsuki huffs once more, before gripping his blonde locks. No, Kaken. Everything I said was true. The blonde cuts him off once again without hesitation. How could I even believe you now? After everything? It took a couple of seconds before Izuku could notice that the blonde had fallen on the floor, hitting the ground with impact. He sat on his knees, crying his heart's contents on the floor, clutching the hem of his shirt as he sobbed pathetically before desperately asking, how could you do this to me, Izuku? Everything just happened so fast. But Izuku knew one thing, and that is regret always comes last. And he regrets everything he has done. The large drops of tears cascaded down Katsuki's pale skin, and the sight of it was burning Izuku alive. He knew he deserved this feeling, but seeing his beloved suffering from what he did was not something Izuku would be found joyous about. He always knew the consequences of his actions, prioritizing Clark as his student, receiving his gifts without even deciphering his intentions, and not stopping himself from Clark's flirtatious offerings. It was too hard to say no since he had adored the kid and had spoiled him too much, would come to him sooner or later. And amongst all of that, it seemed as if he chose Clark and had prioritized him more than his own lover. It was an act of cheating, right? There was nothing physical, yes, but the fact that Izuku had unconsciously led the young man on was already the basis. He knew it was already too late to scream that he should have never let his guard down, but the guilt and regret still remained close to his chest, as if they were stabbing it rapidly. Izuku moves closer to Katsuki, leaning down as he reaches for the other man once again, as a sign that he was still there and that he is extremely apologetic about everything. But much to his dismay, Katsuki immediately swatted away his hand before moving back using his lower body. "Don't effing touch me!" Izuku gasped softly, hurt by how Katsuki was treating him. It was as if they were back in the old times. Please don't treat me like this, Kaken," he begs, shaking and trembling more. "I know my faults, I know my mistakes, I know that I hurt you, but please don't push me away." What startled Izuku was the chuckle Katsuki had emitted. His tears were pouring heavily still, but ironically he held a smirk. "Then why come here with me? Why agree to this whole ordeal?" The blonde huffs. "How could you smile and act as if you're so in love knowing that your love affair would maim me?" Izuku had no choice but to shut his mouth at that retort, his insides boiling in shame. "How can you make us both promise something about so many goddamn things when you've been hiding this all along?" Katsuki screamed now, clutching his hair tight. Silence passes before Katsuki gulps, gazing straight into Izuku's shining green eyes. "Don't tell me you just agreed with going here with me just because you were guilty? That you pitted me?" Izuku was quick to cut him off. No, of course not. I went here with you because I love you." Katsuki tears his gaze away. "God, Izuku. Stop with the love bullshit already." He scoffs, not even minding the hurt in Izuku's expression. "Not when you did this. Everything was an accident, Kaken. I didn't mean what I did." Izuku tries to convince, but he fails since Katsuki seems to have barricaded himself. "Accident?" Katsuki mocks. "How could that be a FNG accident, Izuku?" Izuku hears how Katsuki lets out a couple of ragged breaths. "Tell me how. How could you be with that FNG man without even thinking of what I would feel? Do you even think of me when you're with him?" He screams out before stopping temporarily. Or do you just forget that your Kaken exists too?" Katsuki never cries, and when he does, Izuku had known him as a man who's a tower of defense, a wall that's too unbreakable, yet whenever he does cry, Izuku is well aware that he's too hurt, too confused, his inner child is begging to be saved, his soul cannot mend itself no longer. Izuku suddenly nods. "You don't have to blame anyone, Kaken. Not yourself, not even Clark. Just me." Katsuki stares at him with shock filled with heavy disappointment. "Are you protecting him right now?" "Of course I'm not." Catch a dash. The greenette furrowed his brows. "Was it fun fooling me, Deku?" Izuku shook his head instantly. But Katsuki continued, "Did you like everything he gave? Was he such a FND perfect lover that had you chasing after him so fast? Was he everything you ever wanted from me? Was he everything I lacked? Was he everything I couldn't give you?" He screamed, voice already raw. He didn't even give Izuku the chance to answer back. "I'm sorry for not being effing enough then. I'm sorry that until now I'm still effing trying to impress you when I should have known how to a long time ago. I'm sorry that he's so effing great and here I am lacking everything you ever wanted. I'm sorry I can't give you the gifts or the flowers you liked because I had no effing idea how to." Katsuki gasped for air, heavily sobbing. "I'm sorry if I didn't do good enough. If that I was never enough." Izuku understood it well. For the past 5 years, everything was smooth, yes, though he had hoped for Katsuki to at least give back the kind of love language he was giving, Izuku knew that they were only small things and not meant for bigger importance. He never even expected himself to be so in love with gifts. He never expected that he would grow to be so fond of receiving one that he had been giving subtle hints. Katsuki continues nonetheless. "I was scared. I was scared of doing something that's outside of my comfort zone. That's why it took a lot of self-evaluation and overthinking to even know what my next moves would be." But amidst all of that, Katsuki gasped for air, clutching his chest. "Izuku, I've always been so effing faithful. I never once looked at someone long enough. Never did I call someone attractive other than you. I never imagined myself being with someone but with you. I've always been faithful, so why couldn't you? Can everything still be fixed?" Everything went quiet after that, like some kind of a burning solace that Izuku wanted to escape from. It was like a dream, a nightmare maybe. A nightmare full of Katsuki crying. Izuku feared it. Izuku despised it. Turns out when Izuku had finally got a hold of reality, they were already on a plane boarding back to Tokyo after only a few days of vacation. Katsuki had sadly cut it short after their fight, and well, it did fuel Izuku's guilt more. The blonde sat next to him, but he seemed to be so far away. He was looking at the emails on his phone, messaging his friends and answering dozens of notifications. Izuku wondered why there were so many notifications though. But he still stayed quiet, ironically. He let Katsuki have his space, but he couldn't help but glance a few times, wondering about Katsuki's thoughts or questioning if he was okay now. Izuku asks himself now, if he had told Katsuki about what had happened, would it escalate like this? Or would Katsuki embrace him and thank him for the trust he had given so freely? Izuku sighs nonetheless, it was too late for that. He gazed down now, curious about what Katsuki has been looking at his phone for a while now. It was an article with a oh-so-familiar picture at front. A picture of Izuku and Clark in a restaurant. With the headlines, "Cheating Scandal, Wonder. Couple Breakup?" Izuku didn't even know what to feel anymore. He closes his eyes, hoping that it was all just a nightmare. It didn't take long before they had reached their apartment, and the two stayed silent, as if they both didn't exist in each other's lives. It was so different from before. It felt so cold. It felt like a loveless home. Izuku watches as Katsuki places both their suitcases on the living room carpet, turning around. The shuffling noise surrounding the quiet room, shaking Izuku off of his thoughts. Dismissing Izuku's wandering gaze, Katsuki only sat down and rested his back on the couch. "Kaken?" Izuku softly calls, hoping that the other would at least appreciate his presence. Yet Katsuki didn't even dare to glance back at him and just laid down on the couch facing back, covering himself up with the small blanket draped on it. Izuku felt devastated. So devastated that it feels like it was killing him inside. "I'm sorry for everything," he whispers before turning back, heading to their shared bedroom upstairs. Izuku was shaking as he walked towards the stairs, almost falling and tumbling as he took slow and easy steps. When he reached the room, Izuku instantly walked to the bed, slowly dipping his knees and crawling on the soft covers. Smelling Katsuki's scent, remembering his warmth. He reaches for the lamp, blowing the candle lid off, quickly dimming the room. Thousands of memories rolled before his eyes, and before he knew it he was already crying. He quietly cried for so long, even when he got in the shower after an hour later, cried for more as he tried scratching the vine marks Clark had made on his skin. He scratched his abdomen until the nail marks were red and violet, until they were bleeding, until the water falling from the drain turned red. The marks were nothing but an outcome of a quirk training the both of them had done before, but remembering Clark's hands were trying to reach around Izuku's clothed self possessively, how he was trying to impress Izuku with his quirk, how Izuku, letting his naiveness get him, let the brunette do those things, thinking that they were nothing but innocent gestures. Izuku tried to sleep, but he couldn't breathe, not when his lover was just downstairs, away from him, probably more betrayed than ever. Izuku wants to fix everything. But how? He did fall asleep after a while, but nightmares had flooded his mind over and over again thus. He decided to just stay awake and satisfy his grumbling stomach. Maybe talk to Katsuki now that they have calmed down, he wasn't entirely sure. Katsuki does deserve to know the whole story, he deserves to know what really happened. It didn't take long before Izuku had gone downstairs, but no signs of Katsuki had remained. Even his belongings, even his bags. The living room looked clean, with the pillows perfectly arranged and the drapes organized. Everything looked neat, as if Katsuki cleaned it all before leaving. Leaving? Izuku trembles at the realization. A little note was found on the little coffee table, handwritten by Katsuki himself, distinguished by the cursive handwriting. "I'm sorry," stated there. The wind blew strong from the opened balcony from the far left side, and the sight of wilted chrysanthemums were what met Izuku's eyes. As what they've always learned in school before, once a flower is not taken care of properly, it would perish. It needs heavy attention, care, sunlight, enough water, and every bit of love. That's why many people find it hard to house one. Realization hits him hard. Izuku never took care of his very own chrysanthemum, and now, that orange flower was wilting away. Everybody's asking me about what happened to you, Bakugo. I can't just keep lying to them. Kirishima groans, massaging his forehead with 2 fingers as he downed his drink in the other. Shiro and Kaminari's been calling me nonstop. Even fans have swarmed me over the past week just to ask questions about you. He adds, crossing his legs and turning over to the blonde who had worn his hoodie over his head to hide himself, as both found themselves in a secluded area in a bar located downtown. And although the bar was infamous for being an underground one, Katsuki still didn't want to risk getting seen. The blonde shrugs, swirling his glass. Can't I just take a break for a goddamn week? Week's already over, you know. The redhead sighs, you should have at least given your agency a note that you'll take a break. The media had gotten frantic about your disappearance. Katsuki knew that leaving everything behind was not in any way a commendable act to do, but he couldn't blame himself. The devastation he felt upon hearing what happened behind his back from Izuku himself was immense, and he knew that if he had stayed home, he would have just broken down again and again. Katsuki knew himself well, and he guessed that all he needed to do was calm himself down, or else he'll probably just explode. He ought to clear his thoughts before talking to Izuku again. However, he didn't expect his calming himself down moment would take longer than a week. Just bear with me, shitty hair. Katsuki had uttered out after a minute. Just for a little while. I'll come back to Deku, don't worry about that. I'll talk to him about everything and get all of my shit together. Just give me dash. Kirishima finishes his sentence. A bit more time? The blonde sighs before nodding slowly. Yeah. Just a bit more. Over the past few days, Katsuki had found himself doing nothing but staring at the ceiling of his hotel room. His clothes were scattered near suitcases, and Tupperwares and foam containers were all over the place. He knew he had to change this kind of lifestyle that he started ever since he left Izuku, but Katsuki couldn't even bring himself to care about anything anymore. Everything felt wrong the moment he left their house. Katsuki didn't want to leave, but he knew he had to. He wasn't aware of what Izuku really wanted at that point, so maybe leaving would be the best option too, but Katsuki knew he still had to come back. He didn't want to leave everything that way. He didn't want to break their relationship at all. How's Deku? He broke off, leaving his glass on the table counter. He saw Kirishima sigh, and as if on cue, Katsuki's eyes instantly softened. Not himself. The redhead pursed his lip. With the scandal going on, reporters have been flocking him heavily. I think everything's burdening him at this point. Katsuki closed his eyes before looking away. It was already evening, but he wasn't sure if Izuku's already asleep. He wanted to know if his nerd was doing okay, or maybe that Clark guy is with him at the moment, who knows? Katsuki just wanted to know how he's doing after everything. But once again he couldn't bring himself to go back home. He felt Kirishima pour alcohol in his cup again. Do you think Midoriya really did cheat on you, Bakugo? That's so unlike him. The blonde scoffs, a bit happy that it wasn't just him who had been thinking about that. He had that thought for a while now, yet there was half of him thinking that it was just him being in denial about the affair. But he knows Izuku well, that nerd would never do such a thing. But everything that he said on that night counters it. Don't know. He answers. Maybe, maybe not, but he said it himself to me. Told me that he was with that motherfucker the night of our anniversary. His fists clench involuntarily, feeling the anger seep through his veins again. Kirishima gasps at that. Come to think of it, the picture of him and Thorns has been circulating for the whole week now. Unexpectedly, Midoriya hasn't given any statement about it. Oh really? Deku's always been one to fix negative news about him so quickly. Katsuki stares at the brown-looking alcohol on his glass, thinking if Izuku would actually not deny anything and just break their relationship off. Could he really do that? Katsuki didn't want to think about it. He took the glass and gulped down a big sip before releasing a sigh. I still am in denial about everything. Deku loves me, I know that. But would he really do that behind my back? Really? My Deku? He wanted to believe that Izuku was just the normal blockhead. He was being confused about everything. Maybe his too vulnerable personality had ended up being his downfall about what happened. Cheating is nowhere in Izuku's personality. His father was a cheater after all, and Izuku hated his father to the very core. But everything came out of Izuku's mouth already. Katsuki didn't even know if he wanted to believe it or not. What would you say once you talked to him? Kirishima cuts in. It took a moment before Katsuki could answer. I really don't have a clue. He lets out a strangled chuckle. I don't know if I'll forgive him or leave him again. I don't know if I'll make him explain everything or just be quiet. I don't know if I'll just tell him to forget everything that's happened and move on. Would I even have the goddamn courage to talk to him? God, shitty hair, I don't know. Katsuki comes to a stop, realizing that he had been embarrassingly ranting. The redhead lad pats his shoulder softly. I hope you can figure this out, Bakugo. I would have been clueless too if I was in your position. So just Kirishima sighs. Just talk to him with all honesty when you go back. Promise me that. Katsuki only stares at him, eyes dead and void. He was already so dead inside. Every day felt like some battle he needed to face, and the irony was that he always loses. He was emotionally drained, so drained that he couldn't think of anything anymore. He just wanted to wake up from this nightmare, this heartache. I want to see you smiling again, Bakugo. Kirishima rasped out. He must be burdened by everything too, having to see someone so close to him falling apart right in front of him. Yeah. Katsuki mumbles softly, I'll be fine. Soon. He adds. Kirishima had to leave after a couple hours. It was already midnight and Katsuki had understood that the redhead also has a life of his own. Mina is surely worried by now too. Thus, Katsuki found himself all alone sitting on a stool in front of the bar counter with his drink in his hand. The bar was loud, with young adults dancing and partying around while others were playing pool somewhere. The atmosphere didn't change anything in him though. Yes, everything was so wild and loud, but Katsuki stayed silent. So silent that the bartender stared at him with concern. Thankfully, his face was well hidden with his hoodie. Surely, they wouldn't recognize that he's a well-known pro-hero, Dynamite to be exact. He sat there for hours, swiping on the pictures on his phone. Deku smiling, Deku laughing, a candid photo of Deku, sleeping Deku cooking, Deku doing a presentation in front of the hero board of trustees. God, his gallery was full of his lover. Katsuki had loved him so much. Yeah, he wasn't perfect himself, but he knew he did everything just so he could be what Izuku wanted. Though he was slow in the process of understanding everything, at least he was trying, right? He closes his phone, before releasing a shaky breath. He didn't want to cry in a goddamn public space, but here he was already at the verge. He had been crying for days now, he couldn't even stop himself most of the time. Maybe it's time to talk to Deku at last? You sure you're gonna stay here, Clark? Somebody asks from behind. Up. You can go now, I'll just drink a bit more. Katsuki's eyes widened. Well, we'll go on now, lover boy. Good luck on your flight tomorrow. Katsuki immediately tensed as he let go of his glass on the table counter. Thanks, Mr. Said. You too. He says with enthusiasm, his accent very noticeable. The blonde gulps, straightening his back as he sensed the familiar man's footsteps walking to his direction. The brunette sat beside him as if it was a coincidence, but Katsuki was well aware that it wasn't. He was so close to snapping already. But he kept himself posed. He knew he needed to act professional. He needed to be at his best attitude. Because right beside him was the threat he had always been wary of. Half of Izuku's affair. Clark, the newly debuted pro-hero Thorns. The one who had entered his lover's life. The one who had given Izuku so much flowers even though the whole world already knows that he's already FANG taken. The one who had apparently touched Izuku also. Katsuki remembers those vine marks so vividly, burning on his mind like wildfire. This was the man who stole his love away. Katsuki huffs, almost laughing out loud. What the F was so special about this man? Katsuki's hands clenched into fists. He then pulls off his hoodie and faces the younger brunette with a striking gaze. What a pleasure to see you in person, Mr. Dynamite. Clark greets with a smile. Why don't you drink with me for formality? We're both heroes after all. The brunette shrugs after. I've always been a fan of yours also. Katsuki huffs with a smirk. Yeah, it's very noticeable. Yet I never thought you'd take interest in my lover though. Are you perhaps a fan of him too? The way Clark tensed instantly made Katsuki so effing satisfied. Yeah, you can say that. The younger lad confidently answers, raising his glass up. The blonde's eyes squint. You sure you're of legal age to be drinking? Clark instantly laughed. Oh, of course I am. I'm an adult, Mr. Dynamite. Katsuki stares at him, head to toe and vice versa before frowning. You just seem a bit childish, don't you think? He comments before raising his cup. Well, since you've requested it like some good servant, let's drink. As both their glasses clanged with each other, he only had one thing in mind. Katsuki wanted to burn him alive. The silence was too thick for the both of them, and though Katsuki could feel the scorching fire deep in his knuckles, he knew he had to be still and patient. He knew that one of them would break with such tension in the atmosphere, and Katsuki wasn't FANG losing this game. If he indeed has lost Izuku once to this man, he'll never lose again this time. Clark sat right beside him, taking sips from his glass. He would glance at Katsuki from time to time, as if he desires to speak something, but it always comes short and it leaves Katsuki curious. He hated the guts of the brunette man, acting like some kind of an important someone when he's nothing but an extra. Clark shifts right beside him, letting out a satisfied gasp as he finishes his liquor. It's been a while since I have seen you patrolling though, Dynamite? Isn't it quite odd for such a high-ranking hero? He asks, acting cockily. Katsuki remained calm nonetheless. My issues are not yours to meddle with, kid. Better watch your mouth. The brunette didn't seem to falter at his rebuttal. Well, I've been just wondering since yours and Izuku's name have been on the news for some time now. Stillness gone, the blonde swore he just felt a vein pop off on his forehead. With fists clenched, his stare full of venom, he says, You love meddling with my goddamn life so much? Don't you, kid? I don't think you know what you want. But I'm not here to talk like some young high school girls. You don't have to talk, you just have to listen. Katsuki slammed his glass, clearly annoyed. Tell me why, then? I don't know what game you're playing but I dislike it. Especially since you hold no importance to me, nor to my lover. Much to his dismay, Clark didn't even falter one bit but instead chuckled softly. I beg to differ on one part. Because even for a little bit, Izuku did care for me. He swirls his drink, gazing at it longingly. Before Katsuki could ready himself for what the brunette was about to spout, Clark suddenly utters, Izuku dislikes liquor but I wish I could have seen him drunk on one occasion before I leave. How lovely that sight would have been. Katsuki was in utter disbelief. He didn't even comprehend the audacity of this man to talk about Izuku with such intimacy. He huffs, flabbergasted before raising an angry brow. Is this why you went here? To talk about my lover, really? Clark shrugs dismissively. Actually yes. He laughs softly, lifting his chin. Izuku was something else, you know. He was the clearest water in a field full of grainy sand. He was a flower in a road full of thorns. I guess you're also aware of that. Katsuki swore there was definitely a vein on his forehead that was going to pop the more the brunette speaks. His flowery words and flattery towards Izuku had made the blonde clench his teeth and his fingers until his snails almost pierced his skin. However, even if his blood was already boiling hot, ironically, Katsuki still kept his mouth shut. Clark leans his chin on the palm on his hand, leaving his glass on the marble counter. He saw the goodness in me when I thought there was nothing. I don't want to expose my life back home but it wasn't as colorful as the flowers I create. But he, Izuku, had me thinking that maybe there's so much more than what life has already given me. The brunette clasped his hands together. He was so good, Dynamite. So good that it drove me crazy. Katsuki wanted to get violent, specifically bash the glass bottle of whatever liquor he was drinking right over the BSTRD's head. He didn't care if it wasn't hero-like, because God, the heavens were testing every strength and composure left in his body. But there was a deep growing jealousy rising up, and Katsuki wanted to ignore it. Yet the more he listened to the younger man, the more he realized how Izuku really did care for him. Clark continues, Did you know I almost planned to permanently stay here? Because I once believed that my place was by his side. There Katsuki found himself, unable to grasp on self-control. I'm known for being frank as F-, so let me tell you this, Clark. The blonde starts, majestically placing his glass on the marble. You, he points right at the younger lad, have no place by his side. Whether you like it or not, I solely, and the only one who had already filled that position. Clark cuts him with a shrug. I've known that long enough. Oh, how much he talked about you to me. It was quite an excruciating pain if I may be honest. He was pleasantly surprised about that, but the blonde hid his emotion with a victorious smirk. His jealousy immediately diminishes. He clicks his nails on the marble, the clicking sound continuously flowing through their atmosphere. Well, that's Deku for you. I'm envious indeed. How I do everything just for Izuku to feel that way for me. The brunette crosses his arms on his chest. You're lucky, Dynamite. Both of you, I guess. Katsuki only takes a sip of his drink. I once believed that I could sweep him away, seeing how satisfied he was with just loving you and nothing else. I thought he didn't receive anything in return. But no, for some reasons he was so content with just loving you. He talked so much about you I almost hated seeing him, and you loved him just the same. He speaks with a tranquil voice, soft and pliant. He sends a melancholic but full smile to the blonde, and I thought, how could they just love each other? Love was something more for me. It was an act of bargaining, an act of pleasing, an act of obsession. But no, he shook his head slightly. You two loved each other so effortlessly. That rang something within Katsuki. He continues, I knew he would never be mine, so I meddled a bit, became a bit too handsy. Tried to mark him, got a little clingy too. Knowing him, he was far too kind to decline me even though he had gone uncomfortable. His eyes had gone soft of guilt. That night of your anniversary, I stole him away from you thinking that maybe I could win him with my flowers, but suddenly he forgot his love for flowers, suddenly he just desired you. He left me that night running back to you. A wave of relief washes over Katsuki, a large tsunami of realization hitting him like a brick. Of course, Izuku would consider that as an act of ALT, not even minding that the society's ideology differs so greatly. He knew the brunette would never break his heart in that way, but still, it was indeed his mistake for doubting Izuku. Katsuki should have trusted his partner, although Izuku did repeatedly say that he had cheated. Such plentiful misunderstandings indeed. He tried his best not to smile, suppressing all his urges not to turn back and run back to their shared apartment. Goodness, they were both so FNG stupid, it's insane. Clark shrugs dismissively after, all thanks to the media though, they've come up with something I didn't even expect, but it's an outcome I have wanted. But now that I've destroyed your relationship, I still couldn't find satisfaction. Katsuki emits a cackle. You didn't destroy Sheet, that's why you're unsatisfied. The brunette quickly laughed aloud with him. I guess I can agree with you on that one. Once both had calmed down, Clark looked over to him with a longing look. I did everything I could just to satisfy his inner desires that he had wanted from you, but here you are, effortlessly being yourself, and yet he chooses you still. Katsuki huffs. Do you think I ever asked him something I knew he could never do? Loving him was all of what I am, boy. He grips his glass. He torments me with his love, making me SLV for that feeling until all I could do is all just for him. Clark seemed to be taken aback. Like some kind of fire. He whispers, a bit surprised. Katsuki couldn't help but nod as he added onto Clark's words, burning you until you're nothing but ashes. The blonde smiles now, still couldn't believe he was saying such things. He knew he was such a sappy F-, but who cares? Loving Izuku is like being in an open flame, kid. And if you enter a flame larger than you've seen before, then you'll burn to death. Katsuki squints his eyes in a mocking way. Hurts, doesn't it? That my Deku would never choose you? The way Clark bit his lips in pain gave Katsuki such pure satisfaction and euphoria. A fire imitating a flower, that's who Deku was indeed. Dangerous, fierce, could end you in one sweep, but yet so appealing and mesmerizing, so addicting indeed. And Katsuki would indeed bathe in his fire. There was a reason why even though he and Izuku were already at rock bottom, they still couldn't let go of each other. That even in flames, they'll still find each other and be with each other. That even though they had their rough patches, no one had the gall to let go, to free each other. Maybe it was an obsession. Maybe it was much higher than that. Clark changes the topic all of it. Sudden, pushing the half-spent liquor bottle towards Katsuki's direction. But nonetheless, I guess you can see this as my way of apologizing. Izuku had never cheated on you. The media just twisted it up, dragging me along with such scandals. Katsuki finishes his fill. I thought you planned this along though, why apologize to me now? I guess, you can say that the final stage of grief is acceptance. My plan didn't come to life, so I'm blaming them instead. Izuku doesn't deserve any of this. He has been nothing but kind to me. I couldn't hurt him any longer. I loved him so much that I couldn't keep doing it. It was stupid of me for planning that anyway. Katsuki rolls his eyes away, paying the clerk behind the counter swiftly. Clark shifts his gaze away too. You're a lucky one, Dynamite. I could create any flower on the palm of my hands, just to impress Izuku. Yet you're capable of doing that by just existing. Knowing that he already had his fill of both information and liquor, Katsuki quickly decides to end the conversation. Katsuki stood now, satisfied, smirking over to the young lad. And as if his instincts were driving him, he gave the lad a solid punch, making Clark tumble from his stool and falling over. The brunette quickly touched his bleeding lips, coughing a bit right after. His eminence and whines of pain-felt music to Katsuki's ears. That's for being such an annoying sheet. He sends him a jab on the stomach, not caring about the clerks and guards approaching. That's for trying to steal my goddamn lover. He steps on his face with force, squishing his flushed and bleeding head onto the concrete floor. And well, you just deserve this. Clark only laughed, as if accepting the punishment wholeheartedly. The kid was young, he was naive, broken from home, a bit reckless, but he'll learn. His naiveness and recklessness might have also been the reason why Izuku was drawn towards him. Knowing Izuku, his protectiveness had always been his most annoying attitude. Katsuki turned back now, fleeing the scene before it could get worse. He sighs to himself, laughing hysterically all of a sudden, feeling the little droplets of rain hitting his face. Loving had a lot of things involved in it. It wasn't just a clear road up ahead. No, it was a rocky path on a steep road with fog and thick clouds covering a never-ending adventure. It was truly being a flower inside an open flame in a winter wonderland. But if loving Izuku would burn Katsuki in severe degrees, then burn him down until he's nothing but ash. Izuku had been crying for days to no end. The few moments and small amounts of time where he found himself all alone were filled with nothing but immense heartbreak and regret. He was stressed, heavily exhausted with prominent dark circles under his eyes and pale complexion. It was as if life itself was sucked out of his whole soul. Well, his life did leave him over a week ago. Ever since the news about his infidelity bombarded everyone's daily gossip, Izuku has been nothing but restless. News anchors and interviewers had flooded the agency he worked at ungodly hours. They even flooded the building in which he and Katsuki reside. Well, Izuku resides. There were many times Izuku would find himself laughing all of a sudden, then crying right after. He deemed himself unworthy, a laughingstock perhaps, and it was so cruel that the majority of the people he knew sided with him in the situation. They claimed that Katsuki deserved that kind of treatment as he was surely nothing but a shitty boyfriend. They said that Izuku was smart enough for finally replacing the blonde with someone else. Katsuki had a slightly bad reputation since he was brash and harsh towards everyone, but he doesn't deserve to be called an incompetent lover just because of baseless rumors. God, Izuku despised it all. He despised himself for most of it. He drenched himself in cold water, the shower head flooding the base of the compacted room with how heavy it dropped. Izuku wanted to drown in nothing but silence and rest. In his kakin's warmth, he pleaded. He was fully naked, and the heat of his body had already diminished with how cold he set the shower on. The cold water was already making the glass frost. Izuku swears the coldness would probably rival Todoroki's right side. His skin was already so red from all of the scratching, some even had small wounds on them. But even so, Izuku continued, digging his nails on his waist, trying to remove the remaining redness the vine marks had left with another set of scratch wounds. The vine marks weren't as red now, unlike before, but it was already turning into a blackish-purple color. He wanted it gone, he wanted it to disappear. Though the bruises held no malice in them since he only got them from sparring with Clark with the usage of their quirks almost a week ago, Izuku still held a massive hatred for the discoloration on his skin. It reminded it of how unworthy he was, and of how terrible lover he was to Katsuki. It reminded him of his infidelity, of his neglect, and everything. It took a while before Izuku noticed he was already crying, the cold water dripping on his head cascading with it. And as if on cue, he fell down on his knees, directly on the tiled floor of the bathroom, wailing loudly. "Kaken!" he whispers, his voice croaked. "I'm sorry. Come back, please." He cries more. It's been more than a week since he had last seen Katsuki's face. Izuku was dying in guilt, pain, hurt, regret, and mainly rude. It was a bit refreshing when Katsuki had finally reached the oh-so-familiar door of the apartment that he lived in before. He had gotten so tired of living in a crappy hotel with some cup noodles to satisfy his dietary needs. But nonetheless, it was good to be back. He sighs, stretching out as he lets go of the handle of the suitcase he brought behind him. To say that he's nervous was an understatement. Goodness, he was terrified of what awaits him beyond that door. Would Izuku still be in there? Is he okay? Is he still breathing? Would he ever forgive Katsuki for leaving? Would he even want to talk? Katsuki tried to calm himself down, but it was fruitless anyway. Thinking about everything that had happened, Katsuki wants to do nothing but laugh. He wasn't the type to smile or laugh at things, but with these great misunderstandings he found it very much ideal to do so. Understanding everything that happened made Katsuki call himself an idiot as well. He remembers how he lacked the knowledge of what the additions of love had in store for him and Izuku, his insecurities about the flowers Izuku had put on their balcony, how he tried to step out of his comfort zone, how he blamed himself for being inadequate. Well, if he hadn't been too confident in himself that he was giving Izuku everything he wanted since he knows Izuku like the back of his hand, this shouldn't have happened at all. He realized that even though he loves and adores and knows Izuku well, he should have still known more about Izuku instead of relying on what his brain could give him. It wasn't just about talking and communicating with each other, it was a matter of understanding one another in a sense that they were still two different individuals. Bound to fight and have disagreements, bound to be frustrated with each other, bound to forget and miss, and long, and have disputes, and misunderstand. Yet as long as they know that they love each other deeply and are willing to change continuously to suit each other, Katsuki knows that it would be fun. Thus, he reaches for the doorknob, giving it a twist and slowly opening it. The creaking sound came next, and Katsuki cringes slightly as if he was trying to sneak in. "Kirishima-kun, just please tell him to come home. I know that you know where he is, I know he trusts you that much. So please just tell him to come home. I can leave if he wants dash." Katsuki hears the sobs loud enough to make his heart crack immensely. Izuku was seated on one of the chairs of their four-seater dining table, faced with tons of papers which Katsuki had perceived as hotlines and contact numbers. "Just calm down, Midoriya," he hears Kirishima's voice on loudspeakers. Izuku sobs louder, trying his best to catch his breath. I can't lose him, Kirishima-kun. I know I made a mistake, so many mistakes. But I need him." He whimpers, burying his face on the palm of his hand. "I don't know where he is, and I know he's hurt about what happened. You know how he is when he's troubled." Izuku explains. "Bakugo is an adult man, he can surely take care of himself." The greenette grips his hair, stomping his foot on the floor. "I know that. I know he can. I know he's strong enough to take care of himself, but I'm not." Kirishima instantly quiets down at the remark. "The guilt is eating me alive. It doesn't matter if he wants me or not anymore, I just need him to come back. I need to know if he's safe." Izuku breathes out, clenching his fists. I need Kaken here, Kirishima-kun. I need to tell him how sorry I am. I need to tell him I regret my actions. I need to tell him how much I love him. I want him back here." He slowly utters, every word being heavier than the other. I need my Kaken here. He whimpers. Katsuki felt the anger he once had the last time he was here evaporate. All of his emotions were replaced with nothing but love, a love he had always carried and given to his beloved. He had always been like this, ready to sacrifice everything for Izuku, ready to bend everything down until Izuku's satisfied. Even at the time when they were only developing their friendship years ago, Katsuki has always been a SLV to Izuku's love. Katsuki gulps down, stopping himself from also crying. He steps out of the shadows as Kirishima ends the call with a simple advice of being calm and situated, then slowly walks toward the crying greenette in the dining room. And Katsuki, being Katsuki, stops behind Izuku, who's still unaware of his presence, then crouches down, couldn't even help himself but slowly wrap his arms around Izuku's shoulders, slightly kneeling down as he plants kissed on the greenette's cheeks from behind. Izuku was startled at the sudden contact, his fighting instincts kicking in. But as he stares at the gentle red eyes who stared back at him with nothing but love and adoration, Katsuki saw how his vigilant green eyes turn into something more warm, more worried, like a wave of relief washes over them. Izuku couldn't help but cry louder. Kaken. He calls out, wailing his eyes out. Why, you're home. Katsuki only hums as he wipes Izuku's fat tears away, but they continue raining down anyway. He quickly lifts the greenette up, embracing the man with eagerness. Izuku wraps his legs around Katsuki's waist in an instant and continues crying on the blonde's shoulder, spouting apology after apology. Shoo, don't cry. I'm not leaving anymore, Izuku. Katsuki tries to reassure, combing down Izuku's curly locks with his fingers for comfort. Hush now, nerd. I'm right here now. And sorry I took so long before coming home. I was trying my hardest to keep myself intact. He whispers right beside Izuku's ear, voice as gentle as it could be. But knowing the greenette well, Katsuki knew he wouldn't stop crying anyway. Thus, knowing what to do, he continues carrying Izuku with his arms, removing his shoes swiftly before walking to their bedroom. He gently places the crying greenette on the bed, but he was pulled in instantly as expected since Izuku gripped him hard enough that they tumbled. Katsuki chuckled and just continued combing down Izuku's hair, waiting for him to calm down so they could finally talk. He whispers and whispers words of affirmation, of comfort, everything he could think of just to appease the heavily crying greenette, and well, the more Katsuki continued, the more he felt like shit. The moment he left their house a week ago probably mentally and emotionally scarred Izuku. Knowing how the greenette responds to abandonment, Katsuki knew well that this might have traumatized Izuku. And him being the core reason of the said trauma makes him irk. It hurts, hurting someone very well loved. Izuku continues crying still, wrapped around the two large blankets with Katsuki's arms tightly around him. Katsuki notices the scratches on the greenette's freckled neck. He notices how it travels down what was covered by his polo. He notices the wounds on his nails as he holds Izuku's cold hands. He notices the scratches everywhere. The blonde refuses to open the topic early though. Maybe once they talked he can put more ointment on the wounds. He didn't know where those scratches came from, but he has a hunch that Izuku had caused it. He sighs, reminding himself to never leave Izuku like that. I'm sorry. I know. It's okay, nerd, you're forgiven. Katsuki curtly answers. I love you, Kaken. Izuku stares up at him, eyes filled to the brim with tears. He hiccups, having trouble breathing. I never wanted to be with him. I never wanted to betray you. I love you. I love you. I know. Katsuki repeats, placing his palm on Izuku's cheek and giving it a soft caress. He lets Izuku continue, giving nothing but soft touches here and there. I didn't want you to change. Izuku shakes his head, still hiccuping, also a bit dazed. I didn't want you to feel burdened. That's why I never asked you for anything. Katsuki sighs there. Have I been a terrible lover? When have I ever treated you as if you're a burden? The greenette shakes his pretty head. No, hiccup, never. You're already giving me everything I could have wanted from a lover. How could I ask for more? The blonde sighs for more, chuckling softly. As much as it's half my fault that I didn't realize that sooner, you know I can't always know what you want, right? Izuku nods slowly. You're my first love, nerd. I have no knowledge about loving and dating as a whole. As much as I'm teaching you things I know, you gotta teach me too. Izuku nods once more, his face scrunching up as he finally cries once again, but Katsuki remains quiet, letting Izuku pour it out. Don't leave me anymore, Izuku rasps out, reaching both of Katsuki's cheeks with his hands. Katsuki only nods at that before planting a soft kiss on the brunette's forehead. Didn't want to be with him, hated how he touched me, hated how I felt vulnerable and I couldn't do anything. I want to erase these marks on my stomach. I know it all came from training, but I hate it. It makes me realize Clark must have done it out of just innocence. Though Katsuki's anger instantly flared up at the thought of Clark being all friendly to Izuku even though the latter was already too uncomfortable, he knew that the kid wouldn't do more than that to Izuku. Clark was a mischievous one, yes, but Katsuki believed that the boy was still human deep within. He was too smit for Izuku to do things out of consent. Still, Katsuki feels angry about it. I thought his advances were just friendly. I didn't realize he was trying to tell me he had feelings for me. Izuku cries harder. I cheated, but I'm sorry. No, you didn't. Katsuki tries to counter. No, I did. I did. Izuku's cries just drowned everything. Shoo, you didn't. I made you angry. I forgot all about that very special day. Oh, the night of their 5th anniversary. That's not cheating, dumbass. And we were fighting a few days prior anyway, so it's bound for you to forget. Izuku shakes his head slowly, and Katsuki smiles a small smile now that Izuku seems to be finally calming down. No, it's not. Katsuki just hums. It's not cheating. It would have been if you wanted his advances. Izuku shakes his head. See? Katsuki raises a brow. Even though you were with him, I knew you kept thinking of me, didn't you? The blonde only chuckles as Izuku nods with redness tinting his cheeks. At least he was starting to realize better. You're very well forgiven anyway. Just, if someone approaches you and makes you uncomfortable again or just approaches you in that kind of way, just tell me, okay? The brunette gazed at him with surprised eyes, as if he didn't want to believe Katsuki's final judgment. The blonde could see how watery Izuku's eyes were. He could feel him breathing deeply, his hands shaking even though they were embraced in nothing but each other's warmth. How can you forgive me suddenly? Izuku croaks out, wiping his still falling tears. I did something terrible. I even lied about everything to you during our vacation. Katsuki just holds him close to his chest, reminding himself that he has the time in the world for improvement. He'll surely make Izuku feel that he's worth every single thing Katsuki could very well give. It was frustrating, infuriating to say the least, that he never realized Izuku always talked so lowly about himself, and now that the sudden realization hit him like a brick, Katsuki wants nothing but to kick himself in the ball. He swipes a thumb over the brunette's freckled cheeks, mesmerized by how his eyes shine in the dark. Because I love you. And the Izuku I love taught me how to forgive, and to forgive myself also. That mistake of yours, or what you try to call it, doesn't equal to the amount of effing love I have for you. The cheesiness didn't even faze him one bit. I'm ready to change too, like I always do, to admit where I'm wrong, just for you. When Izuku finally smiled, all the walls they had built around themselves came crashing down, and both realized that they were going to be okay, for sure. Izuku nods slowly. Me too. I'm ready to change with you. The blonde smiles, whispering, I love you, a few more times before he's finally satisfied. Izuku replied with the same vigor, and just as fast the whole thing became a competition, their croaked and hoarse voices rising up the more they tried to best each other with affirmative words. At the end, the two just laughed until their stomachs were aching and until Izuku couldn't breathe anymore. It was also due to the fact that he cried so much his nose was so clogged. No more secrets, okay? Katsuki says suddenly. Hey, and no more running away too. Katsuki laughs at that, pressing a harder kiss on Izuku's chubby cheek. Yeah, don't worry. I had to live with nothing but soba and noodles. It was effing torture. Izuku pouts, worried. Me too, I've been having nothing but coffee for breakfast. The blonde growls. You idiot, how can I ever leave you now? You'll die without me. And vice versa. So don't you dare leave me again, you blonde buffoon. Izuku cheekily counters. Unexpectedly, the whole night ended with the two naked and on top of one another, the sudden coldness of the room vanishing and now replaced with the smell of nothing but AC and the warmth mostly coming from Katsuki's heated arms. It started with just a small peck of kiss, and suddenly arms were roaming around each other, removing their clothes and kissing every skin their lips had touched. He caresses the vine marks and the scratches scattered on Izuku's waist and skin with his other hand before diving down and giving it small kisses one by one. And Izuku cries, realizing that Katsuki still loves him and is able to still love him even with his mistakes and scars. Katsuki knew well that they had very much longed for each other for some time now, and the earthly urges just came in washing both of their thoughts until they were full of each other. Izuku looked so ethereal under him, bouncing on the bed with the blankets already scrunched up, and his fingers digging deep into the mattress, finding some kind of leverage as Katsuki moves harder, deeper. Izuku's loudly, tears once again falling down his reddened cheeks as he opens his mouth and his face reacts to the extreme amount of pleasure. And for once Katsuki felt triumphant. He would always win Izuku over. Clark would never know this. He would never know the feeling of being inside Izuku, the feeling of moving home until he hit that bundle of nerves that makes Izuku aware and a mess of illness in bed. He will never know how Izuku's face would contort in pleasure, his eyes wide and his face expressing everything he's feeling. Oh, Kaken! Katsuki only smirks, moving harder as he reaches for the base of Izuku's hard PP and giving it a hard squeeze, making the other yelp and then whine at the intrusion. No, please make me come. Katsuki ignores said plea and proceeds moving deeper and deeper, loving how Izuku screams as he reaches down and places both their foreheads against one another. I love you. Katsuki whispers, planting another long kiss on the other's lips, diving into that wet heat. His final moves were frantic, a bit rigid and not synchronized. He was also nearing his climax. He lets go of Izuku's PP now, and instantly it squirts a good amount of cum, surprising the blonde just for a bit. Katsuki finds himself moving a few more times before pulling out and coming on Izuku's stomach, mixing with the latter's own substance. Both smile at each other, and Katsuki just dives down for an embrace, forgetting how dirty and sticky they were. Izuku fell asleep in exhaustion, but he held a small smile, his breathing a lot normal now. Katsuki smiles wider, satisfied that he made Izuku calm down. Thus, he snuggles closer, pulling the blanket on top of them right after. The scent of rotting flowers is completely gone from the balcony, and Katsuki realizes that Izuku must have already thrown it out. Ironically, Katsuki seemed to be missing the smell. He laughs to himself. He'll make sure to not forget to go downtown once he registers back into the office, and prioritize buying Izuku some of his favorite flowers and some pots and plants to go along with it. The media and their fans could wait about the whole fiasco that had happened anyway. He smiles, reminding himself that everything would be okay, that they would be okay. It's okay for a love to be at rock bottom, or to be soaring high in the clouds. That's how a relationship works after all.